Chapter 7:18. There is nothing I can do to repay your kindness. Let's spend this day together. Looking at the moon in the night sky, Ning Ke burst into tears. He only stopped when he realized that his cries were worse than the howls from afar. After he woke up, hunger took over his body and mind. His empty stomach was like the chi of heaven and earth at the back of the cliff of the academy, constantly squeezing and torturing him. Through the clear and terrible hunger, he confirmed that he had been unconscious for many days. No wonder he was so weak. He found some edible weeds from the grass and stuffed them into his mouth with rainwater. He chewed them until they were soft and swallowed them with difficulty. After a while, he felt better. At this time, he did not know that after the headmaster of the academy ascended to heaven, it rained heavily in the human world. He looked at the water drops on the meadow and did not take it seriously. When the moon disappeared in the morning, Ning Ke looked at the rising sun to identify the direction and started to walk south. He was now depressed and helpless. He did not know exactly where he was going. Then let's go back to Chang'an. His home was there, and so was the academy. Although there was no one in the old brush pen shop or the house by the Yanming Lake, and the old guy could never return to the academy. After walking for a short while, he saw the mountains in the distance covered with snow. He walked in that direction and walked into the night, until the moon climbed into the sky. This kind of day repeated for a while. He walked along the mountain and looked at the moon every night. Sometimes he would suddenly lose his temper and curse at the bright moon with his hands on his waist. Ning Ke knew that the headmaster should still be alive, but in a different form. He was still fighting against the evil heaven in the sky. The waxing and waning of the moon was probably the specific manifestation of the battle. But he still felt very sad and angry, because the moon did not look like the headmaster. A face like a full moon is used to describe a beautiful child. How does it look like you? Ning Ke took out his padao and laughed at the headmaster in the night sky. He cut open the belly of a snow rabbit he had just caught and skinned it. The primordial 13 arrows and other weapons were all left with the black horse carriage by the Sisui River. Now he only had the padao with him. Sometimes he would worry about the big black horse. After cleaning the rabbit, he raised it in the air and said, "Don't burn it." He was asking Sang Sang to roast the rabbit. But there was no Sang Sang now. He lowered his head and was silent for a long time. Then he shouted again, "Sang Sang." When he woke up in the morning, Ning Ke continued his journey south at the foot of the mountain. The snow-covered mountain was Tianqi Mountain. As long as one walked along the foot of the mountain to the south, he would reach Min Mountain, Chang'an, and the academy. On the way, he came across a small herdsman tribe. This herdsman tribe belonged to the Golden Tribe Royal Court. They recognized him as a Tang from his clothes and accent. Not only did they not invite him to dinner, but they also tried to kill him and take away his extraordinary padao. So Ning Ke killed all the people in that small herdsman's tribe. After that, he ate a full meal of mutton and drank 2 bags of horse milk wine. He found a tent that did not smell of blood and had a good sleep. The fatigue and sadness that had accumulated over the past few days were finally relieved. When he left the village full of corpses, there was a boxwood bough on his shoulder, a horse under him, and a rope leading another horse with 4 legs of sheep tied to it. Another few days passed. Ning Ke finally saw the famous gap in the Tianqi Mountains. However, he swallowed his shout of joy before it could leave his mouth. The expression on his face suddenly became very serious. Below Helan City were all the elite cavalries of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. Looking at the dark scene, there were at least a few thousand riders. What really shocked Ning Ke were the 4 carriages behind the grassland cavalries. With his keen eyesight, he could clearly see the gold, silver, and jewels inlaid on the carriages. He could also see the steel plates in the carriages. Those plates were all densely packed with lines. On each carriage stood several grassland powerhouses in full armor. The reason why he could confirm that those barbarians were grassland powerhouses was because their armor was not leather, but metal armor, which was extremely rare in the grassland. These grassland powerhouses were not the real protagonists. They were only responsible for protecting the plates and the people who used them. There was a skinny old man in each carriage. 3 of them were dressed in the bright clothes of the royal court, with necklaces made from human bones around their neck. Only the old man in the last carriage was dressed in ordinary grassland clothes, with no special decorations on his body. High Priest. Ning-Ke looked at this scene and frowned. Although he had not seen the high priest of the grassland royal court on the battlefield, he had heard many descriptions of them by General Ma and other officers. The Tang army relied on array tactical masters and talisman masters. The grassland royal court relied on these wizards who could communicate with the chi of heaven and earth with the plates. They were respectfully called priests by the royal court. Only the priests who were truly powerful and could communicate directly with the grassland were qualified to be called the high priest and be given the precious metal disc. Ning-Ke could not understand why the Golden Tribe royal court sent 3 rare high priests at once. And judging from the old man in the last carriage, he was afraid that his status was even higher than the 3 high priests. Is there any important figure in Chang'an in Helan City? He did not think that the grassland cavalries and the high priest were attacking Helan City. No matter how powerful the high priest was, it would be difficult for him to break through Helan City, which had been modified with corresponding talisman arrays. As for the grassland cavalries without siege weapons, not to mention thousands, even tens of thousands would be useless. After the heavy rain stopped, before the people in Helan City could make a decision, the cavalries of the Golden Tribe royal court arrived at the city gate with the 4 strangely gorgeous carriages. Helan City had been besieged for many days. The atmosphere in the city was very depressed. At this time, there were more than 10,000 Tang cavalries in the city, as well as sublime people like Master Huang Yang and several powerhouses in the army. Logically speaking, it was impossible for the city to be besieged by thousands of grassland cavalries. But it was the truth. The Northern Battlefront Army had launched a fierce surprise attack when the Golden Tribe Royal Court's cavalries arrived at the city gate. That surprise attack was the closest to success among all the attempts, because during that surprise attack, the high priests in the 4 carriages had just begun to use their skills. The grassland had long been soaked by the heavy rain. The 4 high priests of the Golden Tribe Royal Court had used some unknown method to make the grassland in front of Helan City softer and more muddy. The foundation of Helan City had been modified by array masters, so it was not affected by the high priests. But the grassland for miles outside the city had completely turned into a swamp. No matter how brave the Tang cavalries were, they could not do anything when their hooves were stuck in the grassland. They could not rush into the enemy's camp, and could only watch helplessly as the enemy shot at them. A few years ago, during the Desolate Man's first war in the south, the priests of the Left King's Palace had used this trick. At that time, the military ministry sent a military order from Chang'an, asking the armies to discuss how to deal with it. The generals thought that the Tang cavalries were different from the Desolate Man. They were more mobile and would not be surrounded by a grassland. General Han Qing stood at the top of the city wall and looked at the dense grassland cavalry below. He looked at the 4 horse carriages and the corpses of the Tang soldiers. His face became extremely ugly and he said, "However, we have forgotten one thing. This kind of demonic magic is the most suitable to trap Helan City. And now it seems that these 4 wizards of the Golden Tribe Royal Court are obviously much stronger than the wizards of the Left King's Palace back then. If it was in the past, Helan City had enough food stored. No matter how the Golden Tribe Royal Court besieged the city, the Tang army would not have any fear. But now the Northern Battlefront Army was also in Helan City, and the food in the city was already running out. It was very dangerous to be surrounded by the enemy. In my opinion, we have to make up our minds. We will go to the east wilderness through the mountain gap, and then go around the north of Yen Kingdom to return to the country. That is the only way to avoid being trapped here. Han Qing looked at the Empress who was standing by the city wall and said in a low voice. The Empress shook her head and said, "Since Chanyu of the Golden Tribe Royal Court dared to attack me and even invited the nation master, who had been in seclusion for many years, then his main cavalry must have gone south to invade the Tang Empire. What I am worried about now is the safety of Chang'an." The Empress still looked very calm. She said softly, "If it is only the Golden Tribe Royal Court, Chanyu would not dare to go south. So the situation that the Tang Empire is facing now must be much more difficult than what we see. Maybe the whole world will go against the Tang Empire." Han Qing said, "Then we should attack the Yen Kingdom. The East Wilderness is not peaceful. It will take too long to go around the north of Yen Kingdom. Besides, attacking the Yen Kingdom will not slow down the other enemies. What we need most now is time. We have to bring the Northern Battlefront Army back as soon as possible because the Tang Empire needs this cavalry more than ever." The Empress turned around and looked at Han Qing and the two generals of the Northern Battlefront Army. She smiled and said, "I know what you are thinking. You are thinking that the Northern Battlefront Army is running out of food and fodder. What can they do even if they go back now? You are wrong. If the Northern Battlefront Army stays in Helan City, they will be a burden and concern for the Tang Empire. But if we can go south and find food and fodder, we will be a force that our enemies will be afraid of." She said slowly, "I don't know if Chang'an has thought of this. I don't know if the Northern Military Camp's food team was burned by the Golden Tribe Royal Court or they did not come at all. But obviously, Chanyu of the Golden Tribe Royal Court has seen this clearly. That is why he is willing to pay such a big price to trap us here." After a moment of silence, General Han Qing asked, "Then what should we do, Your Majesty?" The Empress said, "We have to break out of Helan City as soon as possible while we still have some food and fodder." Han Qing frowned slightly. The two generals of the Northern Battlefront Army also looked gloomy. They all understood what the Empress said. The problem was that the bodies of the Tang cavalrymen under the city wall proved how difficult it was. Killing the 3 priests is enough. The Empress looked at the foot of the city and the 4 magnificent carriages behind the grassland cavalrymen. She slowly narrowed her eyes and her voice seemed to become colder. Master Huang Yang, who had been silent, suddenly smiled and said, "Or, I can give it a try." The Empress shook her head and said, "The grassland barbarians are too good at shooting. It is too dangerous for you." A general of the Northern Battlefront Army gritted his teeth and said, "Your Majesty, I have several martial arts powerhouses under my command. If there are still clouds covering that shining thing tonight, let them try again." The Empress still shook her head and said, "We have already tried twice. Since we failed, let's not try again. The lives of these soldiers should be more important in the future. Don't sacrifice them here for nothing." Helan City was silent. What should they do? At this time, the Empress was the most distinguished person in the city. The edict of His Majesty had stated that the 6th prince would inherit the throne, so the generals naturally followed the Empress's lead. However, in their eyes, the Empress was a weak woman after all. What could she do? The Empress smiled as if she had recalled some memories from long ago. Then she said softly, "I want to give it a try." Both Han Qing and the 2 generals of the Northern Battlefront Army thought they had heard it wrong. However, before they could react, they heard the wind blowing. The Empress's dress was fluttering on the city wall. The Empress leaped and jumped off the city wall. Han Qing screamed and tried to grab the Empress's dress, but he only grabbed the air. The 2 generals of the Northern Battlefront Army were scared out of their wit. They rushed to the city wall after a while. The people on the city wall all thought they would see the Empress die miserably. Han Qing cried and said, "I should have known that the Empress would not be able to take the blow when His Majesty passed away so suddenly. I'm afraid she had wanted to follow His Majesty for a long time, but the Empress, The crying stopped abruptly. He looked at what he saw and rubbed his eyes until they turned red. He also felt that what he saw was not real. Seeing this, the two generals of the northern battlefront army widened their eyes. Their hands fell on the city wall and almost crushed the hard stone brick. Only Master Huang Yang still looked calm. The Empress jumped off the high city wall, but she did not die. She had not landed on the ground yet. She was still falling in the air. After a while, she would reach out her hand and press on the hard stone wall. She slowed down and her dress rose slightly. She looked like a dancing flower. After His Majesty passed away, the Empress had been wearing plain clothes. So she was like a plain flower. The Empress's feet finally landed on the ground. Her dress fell slowly. The ground outside Helan City was very soft, like a swamp. The soles of her shoes slowly sank. The grass at the edge of his shoes also fell. She walked to the cavalrymen of the Golden Palace in the distance. She looked calm, as if she was going to review the cavalrymen of the Tang Empire. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 719. The further she went into the grassland, the softer the ground became, and the deeper the Empress's feet sank. But at the same time, she walked faster and faster. Her feet rose and fell on the soft and dangerous grassland so fast that the naked eye couldn't see her clearly. She left a shadow behind. The chilly air of the wilderness in autumn brushed past her cheeks and caused a shrill sound of wind. Her hair trembled slightly and her plain skirt turned into a line as hard as iron. The cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe didn't realize what was going on until now. They were shocked and confused by the incredible scene they had just seen. They pulled their bowstrings desperately and shot sharp arrows. The arrows fell like rain, accurately predicting the Empress's speed in advance, and shrouding her figure. The corners of the Empress's mouth rose slightly. She kept moving forward with a smile. The sharp arrow carried a heavy force as it heavily shot into her body. With a crisp sound, the arrows broke in the middle. The torrential rain of arrows tore through her skirt, cutting through her fluttering hair, shooting deeply into the grassland. However, not a single arrow could inflict the slightest bit of harm to her. Looking at this strange scene, the cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe became extremely shocked. Their hands became stiff subconsciously, and the speed of shooting arrows gradually slowed down. In the eyes of all the Tangs, the Empress was the mother of the country. In the impression of the people of Chang'an, the Empress was a gentle but skillful woman. She had been favored by His Majesty for more than 10 years. But no matter what impression they had, the Empress was always a weak woman. However, the Empress who appeared at the foot of Helan City in front of everyone was a general who launched a fearless charge to the enemy camp. Han Qing and the two generals of the Northern Battlefront Army woke up from the initial shock and looked at Master Huang Yang with complicated expressions. They were senior generals of the Tang Army, and they were all martial arts cultivators themselves. How could they not see that the Empress was actually a member of the Devil's Doctrine? Master Huang Yang looked at them and sighed. "What are you still doing here?" The three of them came to themselves and quickly walked down the city wall. The Tang army on the city wall didn't see the secret. Even if they knew, they wouldn't care. All they knew was that the Empress was charging at the damned cavalrymen of the Golden Palace. They were greatly inspired by the Empress' awe and waved the padeos in their hands, incessantly shouting and cheering for the Empress. Long live the Queen! Long live the Empress! The heavy gate of Helan City was slowly opened in the thunderous cheers. Inside the gate, the armored cavalrymen of the Northern Battlefront Army were ready to attack, waiting for the last order. The Empress was very fast. She was so fast that she looked like a demon. When she rushed into the camp of the Golden Palace cavalry, neither the sharp machetes nor the shrill arrows could touch her skirt. They could not even slow her down. She rushed to the south of the cavalrymen of the Golden Palace. Her body was like the edge of a long sword. She easily pierced through the defensive line of more than 100 cavalrymen of the Golden Palace and landed on the gorgeous carriage. With a light touch of her seemingly weak shoulder, the several grassland experts clad in metal armors were sent flying in all directions like stones smashed by iron hammers, falling on the ground of the wasteland in the distance. The old priest in the carriage was still expressionless. He looked at the Empress who was so close to him. His bloody lips kept moving and his fingers kept tapping on the metal disc. The Empress knew that the priest wanted to release all his spiritual power through the disc to the ground in front of Helan City before he died. She wouldn't give him the chance. She reached out her delicate right hand and clenched it tightly. The Empress's hand was small and soft. Even if she clenched it tightly, it still looked small, like the lovely white fruit of the magnolia. It was not threatening at all. Then her fist fell on the metal disc. The metal disc didn't break. The metal disc jumped up and hit the chin of the high priest heavily. The high priest's neck and lower jaw suffered a heavy blow and were completely shattered. He died in an extremely straightforward manner. Fresh blood flowed onto the metal disc and dyed the complicated lines red. After the Empress killed a high priest, she was immediately surrounded by the crowd. The powerful grassland warriors who had been shaken away by her rushed back to the carriage and surrounded her with more cavalrymen. Master Huang Yang stood on the wall of Helan City and looked at the scene in the distance. He frowned slightly. Although he was not worried about the Empress's safety, time was still running out. The national master of the Golden Palace in the last carriage had not made a move yet. Huang Yang took out a string of Buddha beads that he had been wearing since he was a child. He bit the tip of his tongue and spat some blood on it. Then he raised his wrist and threw the string of Buddha beads over the city wall. The blood-stained Buddha beads spiraled in the air and fell on the grassland dozens of feet away from the city wall. Because of the death of a high priest, the ground outside Helan City had become soft and muddy, although it had not become hard again. When Master Huang Yang's Buddha beads fell on the ground, a merciful yet violent aura of fire quickly spread around the Buddha beads. In his early years, Master Huang Yang traveled with a group of merchants in the depths of the West Wilderness. They encountered the merciless slaughter of horse bandits, and the blood of his companions flowed onto his body. The blood was very hot, burning hot, as if it was about to burn. It was at that moment that he was enlightened. His Dharma access was the fire of blood and fury. At this time, there were many corpses of the Tang soldiers lying on the muddy grassland in front of Helan City, soaked in blood. Master Huang Yang no longer calmed his anger with Dharma access. When the fire burned, the water would dry up. Even the thin yellow mud would become hard brick. The grassland was drying up at a speed visible to the naked eye, and then it gradually solidified. Looking at the changes in the wilderness, General Han Qing shouted and raised the padao in his hand high. He squeezed his horse's abdomen and led hundreds of Tang cavalrymen out of Helan City. They rushed towards the cavalry of the Golden Tribe. Behind them, there were still thousands of Tang cavalrymen waiting to follow them out of the mountain gap. The northern battlefront army had been trapped in Helan City for many days because of the terrible rainstorm. After the rain stopped, they were besieged by the grassland barbarians. Their morale was low and they were tired. However, when they got back on their familiar horses and held their padao hilts, their spirits and morale instantly returned to their bodies. The hoofbeats were like thunder, and the Tang cavalrymen were full of vigor. Han Qing commanded the Tang cavalrymen to divide into 3 iron streams and charge toward the other 3 carriages guarded by the grassland cavalrymen. He led his subordinates and rushed to the south without hesitation. The carriage of the grassland cavalrymen to the south had been destroyed. From a tactical point of view, there was no point in charging there. However, for Han Qing, that carriage was very important, because the Empress was still there, being besieged by the grassland barbarians. He had no time to think about whether the Empress was a remnant of the Devil's doctrine. He only knew that he was the Emperor's servant, and the Empress was the Emperor's woman. How could he watch her die? The Empress was blocked by the grassland cavalrymen. Since she married the Emperor, she had not practiced the skills of the Devil's Doctrine for many years. However, as the former saintess of the Devil's Doctrine, she had enough genuine chi in her body. She would not be in any danger in a short time. The pair of white jade-like fists were like two hills. The grassland cavalrymen who came into contact with them either neighed and fell to the ground, died from broken bones, or were thrown far away. Only the few true grassland experts were able to put up a slight resistance. But she was not satisfied. Looking at the luxurious carriage deep in the enemy's formation and the ordinary old man in it, she frowned in the cold wind of the wilderness. If she could not kill the legendary national master of the Golden Tribe, or force him to retreat, then everything would be over. The Empress waved her right hand and hit a cavalryman who jumped down with a machete into the air. She quickened her pace and walked toward the carriage with a determined look and a faint smile on her lip. The ordinary old man was the national master of the Golden Tribe royal court, who had been living in seclusion for many years. He saw the Empress of the Tang Empire walking toward him, and guessed her intention. His old face did not show any panic. Instead, he slowly raised the corner of his mouth like the Empress, revealing an indecipherable smile. Then the old man reached behind him, and lifted a blood-colored curtain hat to cover his face. When the curtain hat was lifted, the national master's face suddenly became gloomy. No one could see that his face was getting older and thinner. Only his slightly bright eyes could be seen. They were so tranquil and deep. The national master looked at the Empress who was walking toward him. The Empress met his eyes and suddenly felt that she had fallen into a bottomless abyss. Her face suddenly turned pale and she groaned. She forcibly suppressed the raging waves in her sense of perception and continued to move forward. But at this time, her steps became extremely heavy and her body felt weak. The national master took off the blood-colored curtain hat and looked at the Empress who was besieged again. He smiled and then ignored what was happening in the south. He pointed to the city of Helan and signaled the two high priests to continue. The two high priests sped up their incantations. Their skinny fingers flicked on the metal plate faster and faster, as if they were beating a drum. The bone necklace in front of their chests became whiter and whiter. The blood color on the surface of the Buddha beads that fell on the ground of the wilderness gradually faded. Master Huang Yang, who was on top of the city wall, spat out a mouthful of blood and his face became extremely gloomy. His Buddha fire was destroyed by the national master and the two high priests, and he immediately suffered internal injuries. When the blood on the Buddha beads finally faded, the ground of the wilderness changed again. The solidified ground became soft and muddy again at a speed visible to the naked eye. The Tang cavalry noticed the change of the ground. But the heavy cavalry could not stop their charge. If they stopped, they would be crushed by their companions behind them. It was even more terrible than sinking into the mud. They could only continue to charge desperately, hoping that they could rush into the camp of the Golden Tribe cavalry before the ground completely softened. But everyone knew that it was just wishful thinking. When the breakthrough of Helan City was about to end in failure again, and it was very likely that they would lose the Empress and the most elite cavalry, there was a sudden commotion outside the battlefield. More than 10 cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe covered their throats and fell off their horses one after another. In their hands there were bloody arrows tightly. This is the 3rd chapter. Today there will be one chapter every hour until we can't stand it anymore. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 720. With the whistling of the arrows, more and more Golden Tribe cavalrymen fell. Just as the cavalry leader was waving his machete, trying to find the hidden archer of the Tang army, a cloud of dust came from the north and rushed into the Golden Tribe cavalrymen like a lightning. The man on the horse turned his wrist and unsheathed his padao. He cut down several Golden Tribe cavalrymen in an instant. Then he stepped on the stirrup and stood up. No one could see how he moved, but the padao in his hand was replaced by an ordinary boxwood bow. He exerted strength in his arms, bent the bow, and shot an arrow at the high priest on the northernmost carriage. In front of thousands of cavalrymen, the man shot as he pleased. No one could stop him. What was even more shocking was that the man was standing on the horse, but the arrow did not deviate at all. With a dull thud, the arrow fiercely shot into the shield. The high priest listened to the sound of the shield in front of him, and his face turned pale. He silently thought that if it were not for the protection of the warriors of the Golden Tribe, the arrow would have pierced a big hole in his chest. The arrow was blocked by the shield, but the man did not stop. He lowered his waist and abdomen on the horse, transferred all his strength to his feet, and stomped down heavily. The stirrup broke. The leather rope broke. The man's huge strength was transferred to the horse, and with a whine, the horse's 4 hooves were torn apart, and it fell heavily on the ground of the wilderness, causing a cloud of dust. With the recoil of the force, the man jumped up from the horse and rushed to the carriage in the north. His body broke through the air, stirring up the wind. He was only a little slower than the arrow. The tail of the arrow was still swinging on the shield, making a buzzing sound. The warrior of the Golden Tribe Royal Court, who was holding the shield, did not have time to withdraw his arm. The high priest behind the shield was still pale, and he was still afraid of the power of the arrow. The archer arrived. He clenched his right fist and punched the shield that was half the height of a man. Several deep cracks appeared on the shield. The warrior of the Golden Tribe Royal Court, who was holding the shield, twisted his arm. The shield followed the momentum of the punch and smashed heavily into the body of the high priest. The high priest's sternum collapsed, and his lungs were crushed into mush under the heavy pressure. He had no time to recite any spells or crush the bone necklace to summon his life-saving measures before he was shocked to death. The Empress heard the tragic cries and sorrowful shouts coming from the north and suddenly turned to look. She saw the young man standing on the carriage. Her black hair brushed past her gentle face, concealing her astonished expression. She did not expect to see Ning Ke here. Ning Ke saw the scene when the Empress turned around. For some reason, he suddenly felt a sense of loss. Then, he turned to look at the carriage at the very back, and at the plainly dressed old man in the carriage. At this moment, he did not know that the old man was the legendary nation master of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. But his intuition told him that the old man was the most important figure on the battlefield. Therefore, he decided to kill this person first. The nation preceptor did not know who this person who had suddenly appeared from the north, killed a high priest in an instant, and was about to change the entire situation of the battle. However, he knew that this young Tang person was very powerful. Therefore, he also decided to kill this person first. Ning Ke dashed towards the carriage. The nation master reached behind him and lifted his blood-red curtained hat. Ning Ke was still hundreds of feet away from the carriage. The nation master's gaze outside the dark curtained hat had already fallen on him. Their gazes met. Ning Ke's sense of perception was suddenly in turmoil. Only then did he know that this old man was a terrifying psyche master. He had been meditating since he was young, so his psyche power was strong, which was rare in the world. After the trip to the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, he had Master Lotus consciousness fragments in his sense of perception, so he was not afraid of a battle of psyche power. Ning Ke had never lost a battle of psyche power. Whether it was Dao Shi in the steam in front of the bun shop in Chang'an, the treasure tree on the mountain path, or Qin Yan in the Lank Temple, these powerhouses of the Buddhism sect who were famous for their psyche power could not defeat him in this aspect. He did not believe that a barbarian psyche master in the wilderness could defeat him in this aspect. Ning Ke did not hesitate to mobilize his psyche power, turning it into a sky full of stones and bombarding the raging waves in his sense of perception. Two extremely powerful psyche powers met in the grassland that was invisible to the naked eye. Ning Ke let out a muffled groan and fell heavily to the ground. Blood kept flowing from his mouth and nose. The nation master's body shook slightly and then recovered. Ning Ke looked up and stared at the seemingly ordinary old man. His eyes were filled with shock. There was actually someone in the world who could injure him with just psyche power. He could even suppress the consciousness fragments of Lotus in his sense of perception. In this psyche battle, Ning Ke was on the losing end and was seriously injured. But his psyche power was also very strong. Coupled with the help of Lotus consciousness fragments in his sense of perception, the nation master of the Golden Tribe was also greatly shaken. The Empress felt it the most clearly because the mental energy that had always seemed to be there and not there, that had always been echoing in her mind, suddenly disappeared without a trace. The feeling of weakness left her body and her heavy footsteps became light again. She slightly raised her eyebrows and quickly mobilized her genuine chi. She leaped forward, pulled out the belt from the waist of her plain dress, and swung it forward. Genuine chi was injected into the soft belt and it suddenly became extremely tough. It flew against the wind and broke through the air, piercing the great priest of the Golden Tribe who was in the other carriage. The warrior in the carriage shouted and held the big shield in front of the belt. Seeing that the belt was about to hit the shield, the Empress's fingers trembled slightly. The front of the belt suddenly became soft again and bent like a willow branch. It went around the edge of the shield and touched the great priest's throat lightly. The great priest covered his bleeding throat and fell backward. The three great priests were all dead. The grassland in front of Helan City gradually returned to normal. Looking at the Tang cavalry treading on the mud, the cavalry of the Golden Tribe royal court seemed a little chaotic. They only heard a very low shout and then a sharp whistle. The cavalry of the Golden Tribe quickly regrouped and stopped fighting with Ning Ke and the Empress. They covered the last carriage and went deep into the wilderness. Before the nation master of the Golden Tribe royal court left, he looked at Ning Ke and the Empress and said a few words. Ning Ke and the Empress were very afraid of the old man's horrifying state and did not chase after him. The Tang cavalry whizzed past them and chased after the retreating cavalry of the Golden Tribe royal court. It was not a good time to chase after them, but at least they had to create a safe zone outside of Helan City. What did he say before he left? The Empress asked. She had read many of Ning Ke's files and knew that he knew many languages in the wilderness. Ning Ke said after a moment of silence, "The old man said that the grassland is a place where life and death circulates. The great priest of the Golden Tribe is not afraid of anything except those who cultivate the devil's doctrine. He has been living in seclusion for many years and heard that the devil's doctrine has withered. But he did not expect to see two powerhouses from the devil's doctrine in Helan City today." The two powerhouses from the devil's doctrine were naturally referring to the two of them. The Empress and Ning Ke looked at each other. Were they really the same? Fourth update, please cast your monthly vote. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to cast your recommendation vote or monthly vote. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 721. The Tao in same way did not only refer to diabolism or cultivation. The Empress had read Ning Ke's files many times in order to deal with him, because he had killed her only brother, Xiao. The relationship between them was very complicated, and the emotions that reverberated between them were very subtle. Back in Helan City, the subtle emotions still reverberated between Ning Ke and the Empress until he entered the quiet room in the attic and saw the gray coffin. The coffin was very big, made of dozens of pine trees from the Tianqi mountain cliff. The bark on the pine trees had not been peeled off, so it looked too simple and crude, especially compared to the status of the person lying in the coffin. Ning Ke was silent for a long time, and then he walked to the pine coffin and knelt down to greet the Empress. The Empress said calmly, "When you saw him in the palace, you never liked to kowtow. Now that he is dead, he can't see it no matter how many times you kowtow." Ning Ke stood up and reached out to gently touch the rough bark of the pine tree. He did not say anything. The Empress had thought that he would smile and say that the dead should be respected as he used to. Then she could mention the dead Xiahou and continue to go deeper into the more serious topic. Ning Ke stood beside the pine coffin for a moment, and then he looked at Master Huang Yang and several generals. He said, "What is the situation now? Why are you staying in Helan City?" The headmaster and His Majesty passed away one after another. It rained heavily, and the northern battlefront army was forced to stay in Helan City. Then there was no news. "We don't know what is happening in the south, but we can guess something," Master Huang Yang said slowly, and then he told them what had happened these days. Since the Golden Palace dared to besiege Helan City, then Chanyu must have led the army to the south. Ning Ke broke off a small piece of bark from the pine coffin that was slightly burnt by the candle. He squatted on the ground and drew a very simple map. He drew a horizontal line at the bottom of the map and said, 7 stockade villages. He suddenly became silent, and his fingers stopped drawing. The room was quiet. People knew that Ning Ke came from the city of Wei, which was a frontier fortress in the Qiqing stockade village. The expression on Ning Ke's face did not change. He continued calmly, "The 7 stockade villages must have been breached. The cavalry of the Golden Tribe has even passed through Pingling Pass and is heading straight for Hebei Prefecture." He threw away the bark in his hand, looked up at the crowd and said, 1/3 of the northern battlefront army's cavalry are in Helan City. Does the North military camp have enough soldiers to defend? If Chang'an City mobilized troops from the Gushan Commandery or even Tuyang City, what would happen to the eastern region? Long Qing will definitely not miss this opportunity. His speculation was slightly different from the actual situation, but the conclusion he reached was not fundamentally different from the reality, and was completely in line with the Empress's view. "We must leave immediately," the Empress said. "Retreat to the south as fast as possible." Han Qing said, "The journey is long, what about the provisions?" A general of the northern battlefront army said, "Let's collect firewood along the way. We just need to rob a few more Golden Tribe tribes." Ning Ke shook his head and said, "The Golden Tribe royal court must have made arrangements. Their elites must have gone south, and the central part of the wilderness is empty. They will definitely not give us a chance to take advantage of them. Those tribes will probably retreat to the north after the rain stop. If we chase after them, the journey will be longer. It is too risky to go deep into the wilderness without provisions." The Empress asked, "What do you have in mind?" "I don't have any good ideas." Ning Ke stood up and said, "First of all, we must take all the provisions in Helan City, and we must make a good calculation. All the provisions must be supplied to the warhorses first. People can starve, and they won't die after a few days of starvation, and they can still move forward with the horses. If it is still not enough in the end, we will kill the horses." The generals were silent for a moment, and then agreed in a low voice. Han Qing frowned and said, "If we take all the provisions in the city, what about the garrison?" Ning Ke said, "The garrison in the city will follow the northern battlefront army to the south." Han Qing said in surprise, "The garrison will follow the northern battlefront army to the south." When Ning Ke was about to say something, the Empress said, "As long as the people are still there, the Tang Empire is still there. Even if Helan City is lost, we can take it back one day." Time was running out. After the discussion, the generals left in a hurry to arrange various matters for the army to retreat to the south. Master Huang Yang went to meditate and treat his wounds, and the Empress went to see the 6th prince, who was a little frightened. At this time, in the quiet room, except for the gray pine coffin, there were only Ning Ke and Han Qing. "When you and the daughter of Yama crossed the border in the black carriage, I was watching you from the top of the city wall." Han Qing looked at him and said. Ning Ke said, "Now is not the time to be sentimental. General, please say what you want to say." Han Qing glanced at the gray pine coffin and said, "His Majesty loved you very much, and now you have already known his last wish. So what do you think?" Ning Ke said, "Go on." Han Qing continued, "Everyone knows that you are close to the princess, but you have an old grudge against the Empress. His Majesty passed the throne to the sixth prince. In fact, I don't care which side you support, but I hope that you can make your attitude clear now. The road to the south is difficult, and if there are problems at that time. Footsteps came from outside the door. Han Qing said no more. The Empress came in with a young man. The young man was wearing a bright yellow prince's costume. He rolled his eyes and looked at Ning Ke up and down. He seemed to be a little curious and a little timid, as if he was not used to seeing strangers. Ning Ke was silent for a long time beside the pine coffin. Then he looked at the prince and asked, "Do you want to be the emperor of the Tang Empire?" The prince was a little confused and looked up at his mother. The Empress gently touched his head, and her expression was very doting. The prince looked at Ning Ke and thought for a long time. Then he said, "My father asked me to be the emperor, so I will be the emperor." Ning Ke said, "Very good. What is yours, and no one can take it away from you." The Empress looked at him quietly and said, "Is this the Academy's promise?" Ning Ke said, "This is my promise, but it is still effective." The Empress said, "I don't doubt this." Ning Ke asked, "Why?" The Empress said, "Because you married Sang Sang in the end." Looking at her gentle and beautiful face, Ning Ke recalled the scene when she turned to look at him on the grassland below the city. Her black hair flew across her face. That scene was very beautiful with a kind of soul-stirring beauty. He found that the Empress knew him very well. Then he suddenly understood why His Majesty insisted on marrying her. The food stored in Helan City for many years was moved away. The horses that died on the battlefield in front of the city were cut off by the Tang army and piled up in the trailers as backup food. It didn't take long for tens of thousands of Tang army to leave Helan City. A general of the Northern Battlefront Army asked if they should burn down the city guarding crossbows and buildings to prevent them from falling into the hands of the barbarians of the palace. The Empress and Ning Ke both disagreed. In their opinion, the Tang Empire would come back in the future, and these were all the wealth of the Tang Empire. The Tang army, besieged by the storm and enemies in the depths of the wilderness, finally began their journey to the south. When they came, their country was the most powerful in the world. But when they returned, their country was already in a precarious situation, like a broken boat in the ocean that could be destroyed at any time. Therefore, the journey back was a bit silent, depressed, and nervous. Ning Ke's expression did not change, but his hand holding the reins clenched from time to time for no reason, and his knuckles turned white. It showed that he was more nervous and depressed than anyone else. After a difficult journey, the Tang army finally arrived at the foothills of Min Mountain. The green in their field of vision was getting thicker, and the autumn trees on the mountain were getting redder. There was still a long way to go to the northern military camp. The Tang army was very hungry and tired, and there was not much food left. But as long as there were no major problems, they should be able to return to the south smoothly. Ning Ke finally relaxed a little, and the fear and nervousness that had been hidden deep in his heart broke out at the same time. He could no longer control his emotions and proposed to go west. Several generals of the Tang army strongly objected. Under the background of the Golden Palace's invasion, no matter how strong he was, once he was alone and surrounded, he could only die. Everyone knew why Ning Ke wanted to go west. But so much time had passed, and even if he went there now, what could he do? In the end, Her Majesty agreed to Ning Ke's request, and even sent an elite cavalry team to escort him. The Seven Cities fortress could not have lasted until now. Han Qing looked at the dozens of cavalry rushing to the west of the wilderness and said with a frown, "It is meaningless for him to take a look now, except for adding to his pain." Her Majesty said, "There are many things that you can only really give up when you see it with your own eyes. Although Ning Ke is not an ordinary person, he is no different from ordinary people in this respect." The city of Wei was right in front of them. In the middle of the barren wilderness, there was a quiet city made of earth. When the wind blew, the dust on the city walls would fall down, landing on the butcher's chopping board, and falling into the wine jars that had forgotten to cover them. The city of Wei was still the same city of Wei, simple and crude. The city gate was a little crooked as in previous years, but if it was closed from the inside, even a battering ram could hardly break it. Today, the city of Wei seemed a little too quiet. The old dust accumulated under the earth wall had traces of black in it, but no one knew whether it was the color of blood coagulation or something else. Ning Ke waved his hand to signal the cavalry to stop. He jumped off the horse, walked to the city gate, and pushed it. The crooked city gate fell with a sound, and the dust rose slightly. He stood at the city gate in silence for a long time, and then walked inside. The cavalrymen sat on horseback, watching him walk into the city of Wei, and their expressions were a little complicated. After a long time, Ning Ke walked out of the city of Wei. His expression was still calm, his back was still straight, and his right hand on the hilt was still stable. No change could be seen, as if he had seen nothing in the city of Wei. "What's the situation inside?" the Tang cavalry officer asked. Ning Ke shook his head and said, "Nothing." The officer frowned slightly, and signaled several cavalrymen to enter the city of Wei. Ning Ke whispered, "Don't go in." The cavalrymen glanced at the officer, and seeing that he did not say anything, they lifted the reins and rode towards the city of Wei. Ning Ke did not turn around and roared, "Don't go in." His voice was loud and violent, like thunder, exploding in the wilderness outside the city of Wei. The horses under the cavalrymen were startled, and stood up. A broken wine banner swayed gently in the city of Wei. Hearing Ning Ke's angry roar, people finally understood what had happened in the city of Wei. No one tried to go in to have a look. Ning Ke walked to his own horse. With every step he took, his head lowered a little, and his body became a little shorter. "When I left, I told you, don't grow old, don't die, and wait for my filial piety. But now? You old fox always like to go back on your words." Ning Ke muttered to himself. Then he laughed, and the smile was a little tragic. Although the army did not pass through the city of Wei, they finally entered the war zone. The terrible destruction caused by the cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court at the frontier fortress, and the ruins of the Tang settlements, appeared in front of people's eyes. This was an exhausted army, but the blood, fire, ruins, broken walls, and dead clansmen they saw along the way had aroused their almost crazy fighting spirit. After a period of rest and replenishment of food and fodder, they would become a terrifying military force. Even now, many soldiers were eager to fight with the Golden Tribe cavalry with red eyes. Fortunately or unfortunately, the Tang army returning south along the Min Mountain did not encounter the main force of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. After killing dozens of grassland cavalry, they approached the northern military camp. The Tang army returning south re-established contact with the general's mansion. Because of the large number of people, it was not convenient for them to enter the northern military camp at the same time. The general's mansion sent an elite cavalry to meet them, deliver food and fodder, and at the same time, they were ordered to take the empress, the prince, and most importantly, the emperor's coffin back to the northern military camp. After a temporary discussion, the Tang army did not raise any doubts about the order of the general's mansion. The army rested on the spot, while the empress and the sixth prince set off with the emperor's coffin. His Majesty's coffin was simple, but very heavy. It weighed dozens of pine logs and needed several war horses to pull it. This was the biggest difficulty the Tang army encountered all the way back south. Now the northern military camp was responsible for resisting the Golden Tribe Royal Court, so it was naturally a bit chaotic. The Tang army guarding around the general's mansion looked anxious. However, when the carriage carrying the pine coffin came from outside the city, soldiers and ordinary people all knelt on the ground, looking sad. Not many people noticed that Ning Ke was sitting in the carriage beside the pine coffin. Several war horses pulled the heavy gray coffin slowly on the street. The wheels rolled on the hard stone ground, making a monotonous and frightening sound. Suddenly there were several shouts on the street. "Kill the demon empress! Wash away the shame for His Majesty!" The shouts shook the sky. A Tang general led hundreds of cavalrymen, rushing from the street, their padeos shining. In the carriage in front, the empress held the sixth prince in her arms, looking calm. Ning Ke sat beside the pine coffin with his head slightly lowered, looking calm, as if he heard nothing. At the beginning of the book, when Ning Ke left the city of Wei, he left 3 sentences for General Ma Shixiang. They are the 3 sentences mentioned in this chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 722. Ning Ke and the Empress did not react to the sudden ambush. It was not because they were brave, but because they dared to leave the Tang army to come to the northern military camp. Naturally, they had a basic trust in the general. The sound of padeos colliding with each other was loud and shrill. After the initial shock and panic, the cavalry battalion that was responsible for escorting the Empress and her entourage immediately began to organize defense and counterattack. On both sides of the street, many archers had been lying in ambush. Those Tang soldiers who tried to ambush the convoy were subdued in a very short time. During this process, the Empress's expression did not change. She just held the sixth prince, looked down into his eyes and whispered something to him. Ning Ke kept his head down until the end of the battle. The 2 Tang generals were shot by arrows and fell off their horses, but they refused to surrender. They killed themselves with their swords. Only then did he raise his head and look out of the window. The carriage finally arrived at the general's mansion. Su Qi, the wilderness-suppressing general of the Tang Empire, had already led the generals to kneel at the stone steps in front of the mansion to welcome them. Before General Su Qi could apologize, the Empress had already led the sixth prince out of the carriage. She looked at Su Qi, who was kneeling at the stone steps, and said calmly, "It's really not easy to walk to the general's mansion." Su Qi did not make any excuses or apologize. He respectfully led the emperor's coffin into the mansion and then invited the empress and the prince to the back house to have a rest. Ning Ke was no longer beside the pine coffin. He sat in the study and drank tea. Not long after, Su Qi pushed open the door of the study and walked in. Ning Ke had met 3 of the 4 great generals of the Tang Empire, but he had never met Su Qi. But according to the Empress's description and Han Qing and other generals' supplement, he was already very clear about this general's temperament. The 2 generals who rebelled had nothing to do with the Gushan commandery. They were the former subordinates of the northern military camp. Su Qi said straightforwardly. Ning Ke said, "It has nothing to do with the Gushan commandery, but it doesn't mean it has nothing to do with Hua Shangyue or the princess, unless you insist that it's your relationship." Su Qi said after a moment of silence, "I heard that Mr. 13 and the princess were very close." Ning Ke said, "I also heard that General Su Qi was most loyal to the former emperor. The rescript of the West Hill Divine Palace has been spread all over the world. I think Mr. 13 has already seen it. It's inevitable that the morale of the army is a little shaken. That's why today's assassination happened." Su Qi said, "I understand what you meant. But since the Empress is really a member of the Devil's Doctrine, then the sixth prince can't inherit the throne or return to Chang'an." Ning Ke asked why. Su Qi said, "Because the West Hill Divine Palace will not allow a descendant of the Devil's Doctrine to rule the Tang Empire." Ning Ke said, "Idiot, the West Hill Divine Palace is already attacking the Tang Empire." Su Qi was silent. He suddenly asked, "There is one thing I want to know." Ning Ke said, "General, please go ahead." Su Qi said, "It is said that the death of the former emperor has something to do with Her Majesty." Ning Ke said, "What an idiot! His Majesty has been suffering from an old illness for many years. As his most trusted general, you must know this. Even if it had something to do with Her Majesty, it was many years ago. His Majesty didn't even care about it. Do you think you are qualified to hate him for his majesty? Su Qi frowned slightly, but it was obvious that he looked a little more relaxed. After thinking for a long time, he looked at Ning Ke seriously and said, "You persuade the Empress to stay in the northern military camp with the sixth prince. I can guarantee that as long as I am alive, I will keep them safe." Ning Ke looked at his eyes quietly and did not say anything. Su Qi responded to his gaze calmly, without any change in his expression. Ning Ke suddenly said, "Although I have said it before, I can't help but repeat it. I really want to know if the rumor is true. Is the general really loyal to His Majesty?" Su Qi said, "I am willing to prove it with my life." Ning Ke said, "You don't have to use your life. You should now be very clear that the former emperor passed the throne of the Tang Empire to the sixth prince. The edict in Chang'an must be fake." "Then what do you think we should do now, Mr. 13? Su Qi said in a cold voice. "Let the Empress bring the sixth prince back to Chang'an to fight for the throne with the new emperor? Let the Tang army split and even fall into a civil war? If it were any other time, I would not hesitate to carry out the real edict of His Majesty and help the sixth prince to ascend the throne even if the Tang Empire fell into a civil war. I don't care if the Empress is from the Devil's Doctrine or not, but not now." Su Qi looked very serious and said, "Now the whole world is fighting against the Tang Empire. The cavalry of the Golden Palace is invading the south, the army of the West Hill Divine Palace is marching north, the Qinghe County has rebelled, and the northeast border military has been destroyed. The Tang Empire is surrounded by enemies on all sides and is in a precarious situation. At this critical moment, the Tang Empire cannot afford any internal strife." Ning Ke said after a moment of silence, "What do you think we should do, General? In the face of foreign enemies, the Tang Empire needs unity most. I can't watch you and the Empress lead tens of thousands of soldiers of the Northern Battlefront Army south to Chang'an. These soldiers should be bathed in blood in the northern frontier instead of wasting their lives in the internal strife. So I want you to persuade the Empress to stay in the northern military camp with the sixth prince." Su Qi stared into his eyes and said, "If you think this is a betrayal to the former emperor, then I can promise you that once the Tang Empire survives this crisis, the northern battlefront army will still support the sixth prince." Ning Ke frowned slightly. He had to admit that the general's words made sense. And the Tang Empire did need tens of thousands of soldiers returning to the south to fight against the invasion. However, the door of the study squeaked and was pushed open from the outside. The Empress walked in and looked at the two. She said calmly, "I want to go back to Chang'an." Without hesitation, Su Qi knelt in front of her and kowtowed repeatedly until his forehead bled. His voice seemed to be in extreme pain as he said in a trembling voice, "Your Highness, I have been loyal to His Majesty all my life, but now I do not dare to carry out His Majesty's posthumous edict. My heart is filled with guilt, and I fear that I will not be able to eat or sleep in peace for the rest of my life. However, in this dangerous situation, the Tang Empire cannot fall into chaos. Your Highness, please reconsider." The Empress looked at him and smiled. She said, "If I bring the sixth prince back to Chang'an, will Chang'an fall into chaos? Or would the great Tang fall into chaos? The general overestimates the strength of us orphans and widows." Su Shi was stunned. He did not understand what the Empress meant. The tens of thousands of Tang soldiers returning to the south were originally your northern battlefront army. They had followed His Majesty to the battlefield. How could they return to Chang'an with me? The Empress said, "I will leave these cavalrymen to you. Only my son and I will return to Chang'an. I think the general will not worry about anything in this way, right?" Su Shi was shocked speechless. He thought to himself that the new emperor had already ascended to the throne and the princess was in charge of the country. Under such circumstances, if the Empress brought the prince back to Chang'an, it would be no different from suicide. Ning Ke suddenly looked at the Empress and said, "I will go back with you." This is the last chapter of the scheduled release. When I was releasing it at night, my hand shook and I pressed the button to release it immediately. It scared me, so I unblocked it immediately. I hope no one will subscribe again. Well, I will continue to write and try to release it every hour on time. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 723. No matter how fiercely Su Qi, Han Qing, and the other generals in the northern battlefront army objected, the Empress would not change her mind. She insisted on taking the sixth prince back to Chang'an. The generals had no choice. Now that the Golden Tribe was invading the south and the northern frontier of Tang was in danger, they could not send an army to escort them. Finally, they decided to send 500 elite cavalries with them. On the morning before leaving the northern military camp, Ning Ke found Su Qi again and said, "Her Majesty and I brought back a troop of tens of thousands of people. I think we are qualified to ask you for a few people." Su Qi thought for a while and said, 500 cavalries are indeed too few. That's not what I meant. Ning Ke said, I don't want living people. I want dead people. Su Qi understood what he meant. He frowned slightly and said, the two generals committed suicide on the spot after the assassination failed. Even if you have their bodies, it's useless. Ning Ke said, the two generals are dead, but the hundreds of cavalries who participated in the assassination have not been punished. I know they are now locked up in the military camp. Su Qi frowned even more and said, Mr. 13, do you want to kill them? In normal times, those who dared to disturb His Majesty's body and assassinate the Empress and the Crown Prince will be sentenced to death. I know why you don't want to kill them now. Ning Ke said, so I won't ask you to kill all of them. But I want you to promise me that they must be sent to the most dangerous battlefield in the front line. After a few years, when the war is over, if there are any of them alive, I will not pursue it. If they die, it will be considered as atonement. After saying this, he turned around and left. When he was about to leave, he encountered a very tricky problem: the heavy pine coffin. Everyone knew that Ning Ke needed time and secrecy to bring the Empress and the sixth prince back to Chang'an. If the heavy pine coffin went with them, it would be very inconvenient. Su Qi suggested to leave His Majesty's coffin in the northern military camp for the time being to motivate the soldiers. The Empress shook her head and said softly, His Majesty wants to go back to Chang'an, so I have to bring him back. Burn it. She looked at the heavy gray coffin and said. Everyone was shocked. The Empress smiled and said, His Majesty is such a carefree person, why would he care about such things? Ning Ke recalled the incessant scolding of idiots in the imperial palace and said with a smile, Indeed. The pine coffin began to burn on the pile of wood. The bark of the tree crackled and sparks flew. In the end, it turned into ashes. When it rains, it pours was far from enough to describe the continuous blows the great Tang was suffering, and precarious was insufficient to describe its perilous state. Wave after wave, each higher than the last, was howling toward it. The Battle of Capital Qing was a great shock to the Tangs, but it did not affect their confidence at all. It was the Golden Tribe royal courts moved to the south that made all the Tangs feel uneasy. The rescript of the West Hill Divine Palace called for the world to attack the Tang Empire, which made the Tangs feel the possibility of their country being destroyed for the first time. The recent news of Qinghe County's treason was the heaviest blow. They were angry because of uneasiness, because of fear, because of anger, and because of anger. The entire Chang'an was in an atmosphere of anger. The ministers of the Empress's faction, who had forced themselves to endure for the sake of the country, could no longer bear the current situation. They blamed the new emperor and the princess in the palace, in the court, and in public. The officials questioned the palace why the empress and the sixth prince had not returned to Chang'an, why there was no news from Helan City, and why Qinghe County, the princess's ally, would do such a shameless thing at the most critical moment of the imperial court. They asked the emperor and her highness why they would have the face to see the former emperor. After the academy closed its doors, the new batch of students from the front yard were sent home or volunteered in the various departments of the imperial court. They and the young students from the imperial college were the most passionate and excited group of people in Chang'an. When the Tang Empire was shrouded in dark clouds, they finally took to the streets and gathered in front of the imperial palace to start petitioning. As for the specific content of the petition, these students were not very clear. But in short, they wanted to change the current situation. They wanted to see change. No one knew where the news came from, but it began to spread among the petitioners. The Defender General of the state Su Shi, who was supposed to return in a few days, had actually been assassinated by the West Hill Divine Palace in the southern Shao Mountain area. The whereabouts of General Su Shi had been betrayed to the West Hill Divine Palace by a noble in the palace. As for why that noble would do this, it was obvious that he had come to the wrong position. He was afraid that General Su Shi, who had always been known for his uprightness, would return to Chang'an and overthrow him from the throne. When the news spread from the petitioners to all parts of Chang'an, more and more people expressed their anger and doubts on the street. The entire Chang'an seemed to have become countless angry rivers. Angry rivers were often muddy. So some people began to fish in the muddy waters, and some tried to turn into fish and slip away. The hidden sentries and spies that the West Hill Divine Palace had planted in Chang'an for hundreds of years began to move. They were ready to take this opportunity to make the situation even more chaotic. Cao Shaoshu received the imperial edict and led the valiant cavalry battalion to the east to resist the invaders. A part of the Yulin royal guards had already gone north to fight against the cavalry of the Golden Palace. Chang'an seemed to be impregnable, but in fact, there were only about 800 Yulin royal guards and hundreds of palace guards. Together with the runners of the Chang'an local government, they could maintain law and order and suppress riot. The situation was precarious. The Qinghe County Guild Hall was located in a prosperous area of Chang'an. Before the news of the warlords defecting to the enemy came, it had been a place under the imperial court's surveillance. Now it was heavily guarded. The descendants of the warlords who were trapped in the guild hall looked gloomy, waiting for their unknown fate. However, some of them looked at the gradually chaotic situation and had other ideas. Li Huiyuan was also very angry. He even felt that he was angrier than the petitioners in front of the imperial city. He felt that he was innocent. The pain of not being understood was like a poisonous snake biting his heart. Yes, he had asked He Mingqi to spend a lot of effort to find General Su Shi's whereabouts. He was also the one who had asked He Mingqi to find a way to contact the bigwigs of the West Hill Divine Palace. The situation at that time was completely different from now. At that time, only the northeast border military was destroyed, and the Tang Empire still seemed to be strong and unshakable. However, when the news of the Golden Palace's invasion reached Chang'an, he immediately ordered He Mingqi to stop the plan. He even exposed his sinister actions to find a way to inform Su Shi. However, the bigwigs of the West Hill Divine Palace did not listen to him. He Mingqi and the military ministry did not contact Su Shi. Su Shi died just like that. Can you blame me? If that old guy really thought of me as an emperor, how could he leave the Southern Army without an imperial edict? If he had stayed in the Southern Army, how could he have died? Why is everyone blaming me now? It's all my fault. The main hall of the imperial palace was extremely lonely and cold. Li Huiyuan sat on the chair and looked at the night sky outside the hall in a daze. Countless thoughts flashed through his mind and then flashed back again. The eunuchs and palace maids were very afraid of him now because he was very angry. This made him even angrier because he clearly saw indifference, alienation, and contempt in the eyes of the eunuchs and palace maids. When I was an emperor and a prince, you could look at me with so much respect and fear. Why did you dare to leave me so rudely now? Li Huiyuan could not stand it anymore. From yesterday to tonight, He had ordered people to secretly kill several eunuchs and palace maids. However, even so, he still could not see the expression in their eyes that he wanted to see. So he became even angrier. He suddenly felt that this cold and lonely hall was not a place for people to stay. He suddenly stood up and waved his hand to push a eunuch who was begging him to the ground. Then he walked to the depths of the imperial garden with Su Chongshan, who had been guarding outside the hall. It was late autumn and the imperial garden was also bleak. Fortunately, there were several kinds of flowers in full bloom, which were very charming in the night sky. Looking at the beautiful flowers, Li Huiyuan finally calmed down a little. "Why do you think these people don't understand me?" he said with a frown. Su Chongshan glanced at the animal eaves on the eaves of the palace in the distance. After a moment of silence, he said, "Because you are not a person who is easy to understand." Li Huiyuan did not notice that Su Chongshan was not respectful to his title. He asked confusedly, "What do you mean?" Su Chongshan said, "No matter how you got the throne, you're the emperor of the Tang Empire now. Anyone with a normal brain wouldn't do what you did. But the strange thing is that you always seem to be able to find a reasonable explanation for what you've done. It seems that your brain is actually normal. Normal people are always doing abnormal things. Who do you think can understand that?" When he said the first sentence, Li Huiyuan came to his senses, but he did not respond. He continued to listen to him in silence, but his face became more and more gloomy. "It seems that you also want to rebel against me." He looked at Su Chongshan and said coldly. Su Chongshan slightly leaned forward and bowed. When he straightened up, his body became like a mountain. "His Majesty has done me a great favor. I have some psychological barriers to killing you, but after these days it has disappeared. Because you living in this world is the biggest shame of His Majesty." Li Huiyuan looked a little nervous, but he did not turn around and run away. He said in a sharp voice, "You have been in the palace for many years. Don't you know that you can't kill me here? So I did not do it until you came to the imperial garden to relax." Su Chongshan said, "You may not know, but this is the farthest place in the palace from the other halls. The animal eaves on the eaves in the hall can no longer protect you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 724. Don't lie to me. My father was always accompanied by the nation master or Master Huang Yang when he went out of the palace. He never worried about his safety in the palace because of the protection of the God-stunning array. No one could assassinate me in the palace. Li Huiyuan scolded, "I'd like to see how you can kill me." He seemed calm and confident, but his voice began to tremble in the end. Su Chongshan raised his right fist and said expressionlessly, "It's easy to kill you. One punch is enough." Su Chongshan punched out, breaking through the wind and landing heavily on a yellow paper umbrella. With a bang, the umbrella sank deeply, but it was not torn. He Mingshi held the umbrella in one hand and grasped Li Huiyuan with the other, retreating more than 10 feet. A little further back was the inconspicuous little building. There were many beasts carved with stone eaves squatting on the palace walls a little further away. After Su Chongshan's punch, these beasts slowly released a very faint aura. Su Chongshan felt the aura. His face turned pale, but he didn't care. He had been a guard in the imperial palace for decades, from the most common guard with a saber to the current chief imperial guard. In terms of understanding the imperial palace's formations, there was no second person in the world. Even Ning Ke, who was in charge of the God-stunning array under the order of Master Yensei, was not as good as him in this respect. At this time, he was more alert to He Mingchi, who was standing in front of the small building. "Why are you here?" He Mingchi didn't answer his question. He frowned and looked at him. He said, "I didn't expect that there was a survivor of the devil's doctrine hiding in the palace for so many years." Li Huiyuan was a little stunned and then said with hatred, You really are the subordinate of that evil woman. Su Chongshan ignored him and looked at He Mingchi calmly. He said, "These years, you have indeed hidden a lot of cultivation. Unfortunately, you are still no match for me. Even if you become the nation master of the Tang Empire in the future, you are still no match for me." He Mingchi looked at him and said, "You are a powerhouse of the devil's doctrine. I am no match for you. But there is one thing. Your judgment is wrong, so the one who will die today will be you." Su Chongshan suddenly felt that the aura from the beasts on the eaves had suddenly become stronger. Thinking of how this person appeared in front of the small building in the middle of the night, he couldn't help but think of an unbelievable possibility. He looked at He Mingchi in shock and said, "How dare you come down here? You're actually able to activate the Eye of the Formation." He Mingchi glanced at Li Huiyuan and said with a smile, "This is the privilege His Majesty gave me. As for the Array Eye, I don't have the Array Eye pestle, but I can activate the killing array in the palace." Su Chongshan let out a muffled groan and his face suddenly turned pale. He felt that his chest was getting tighter and tighter, and his heart was beating faster and faster. It was so fast that his ribs were about to break and burst out. He took a deep breath and forcibly resisted the suppression of the god-stunning array. With a roar, his strong body rushed forward and punched Li Huiyuan, who was next to He Mingchi. He Mingchi didn't expect that the powerhouse of the devil's doctrine could be so powerful under the killing array. His face suddenly turned serious. He quickly held the yellow umbrella in front of him and pulled Li Huiyuan behind him. Su Chongshan's right fist, and even his entire body, heavily struck the yellow paper umbrella. The yellow paper umbrella cracked and the umbrella was broken. He Mingchi spat out a mouthful of blood. He fell backward and hit Li Huiyuan. Li Huiyuan cried out in pain. He didn't know how many bones were broken. Su Chongshan stood like a mountain and clenched his fist, ready to strike again. In the dark of the night, there was a soft sound in the imperial garden. His face instantly turned as white as snow. He held his chest in pain and then fell down. His heart was broken. In the dark of the night, there were broken porcelain everywhere on the floor of the palace. Almost all the eunuchs and palace maids had palm prints or scars on their faces. They also looked frightened and uneasy. After the treatment of the imperial physician, Li Huiyuan's injury was finally stabilized. He looked at the tight bandages on his naked body and the pale He Mingchi who kept coughing. The lingering fear in his heart turned into anger. He Mingchi coughed and said, "Your Majesty, we should inform Her Highness immediately. Don't disturb my sister." Li Huiyuan didn't know why he didn't want to see his sister now. Or maybe he didn't dare to see her. Even in such a dangerous situation, he subconsciously wanted to block the news. He looked at the eunuchs and palace maids in the hall and said coldly, "Whoever dares to talk will be beaten to death." The eunuchs and palace maids hurriedly knelt on the ground. Li Huiyuan thought of the previous danger and became angrier. His eyes became a little blood-red. His uninjured right hand trembled slightly. Then he slammed the table heavily and said coldly, "The subordinates of these evil women are still unwilling to give up. When the empire is about to fall, they even want to take away my throne." He Mingchi said softly, "Your Majesty, please be careful. We need to be careful." Li Huiyuan scolded angrily, "What do we need to be careful? You and my sister always told me to be patient. You told me to focus on the overall situation. But look at what those people have done. They want to kill me. How can I bear it?" A cold expression appeared on the face of the young emperor who had just ascended the throne. He stared at He Mingchi's eyes and said, "I don't want to bear it anymore. Kill them all." Zhuge Warren was waiting for the good news from the palace at home. He was very patient. In his view, Su Chongshan had hidden his identity in the palace for so many years and was extremely reliable. As long as he took action, the new emperor, Li Huiyuan, would have no chance to survive. However, He didn't get the news of the new emperor's sudden death. Instead, several men in black appeared. Zhuge Warren didn't even have time to beg for mercy before he was killed by these former subordinates. Then, assassins appeared in the Minister of the Ministry of Rites and the Minister of Taichung Temple. Chang and city was full of rumors and murderous cries. The people were in chaos. Who took advantage of the chaos to set fires? There were inexplicable conflicts and deaths in the crowd. The chaotic situation was getting worse and worse. The officials on the Empress side suffered extremely cruel blows and suffered heavy casualties. These officials also had strong servants in their mansions, but how could they stop the cultivators? The former Grand Secretary's mansion had long been deserted. Tonight, the front door of the Xing mansion became noisy and tense again. The lantern hanging on the wall by the steward had long been knocked down with sticks and was burning under the stone step. The crowd came out of nowhere and shouted desperately, trying to rush into the mansion. With a bang, the gate of the Xing mansion was finally pushed down by the crowd. No one knew how many people rushed in, beating people and smashing things in sight. The stewards and servants in the mansion were holding weapons, but they were relatively few in number. They were defeated again and again. Several men in black, who had just rushed over, were killed by a flash of cold light in the night before they had time to do anything. The steward and servants were injured and bleeding. Gradually, they were disrupted. The crowd rushed to the back of the Xing mansion and shouted angrily or excitedly, "Find the demoness parents and stone them to death!" In the garden of the back house, Xing Jing and his wife listened to the shouting from the front yard and looked at the vegetable fields that had long stopped bearing fruit in autumn. They looked at each other in silence and slowly put their hands together. Since my daughter's accident, I have retired and no longer cared about the affairs of the court. Even after so many changes, such as the new emperor's ascension to the throne and the empress's invitation, I never went. I thought I was honest enough and kept a low profile. I didn't expect that the brother and sister in the palace still remembered me. Xing Jing looked at his wife and said softly, "I'm sorry to have dragged you down." Mrs. Xing said with tears in her eyes, "I have nothing to be afraid of if I can die with you. I just think about how sad our poor daughter will be if she can't see us again. If it weren't for that girl, we wouldn't have." Xing Jing paused and then sighed, "Forget it. Let's not talk about this. This is probably our fate." At this moment, the almost crazy mob finally rushed into the back house of the Xing mansion. Xing Jing looked at the blood-stained table legs and stones in their hands. He held his wife in his arms and said nothing. At this moment, He Mingxi appeared beside the vegetable field with a yellow oiled paper umbrella under his arm. He looked at the middle-aged man leading the crowd and frowned slightly. The enraged and deranged crowd gradually dispersed. The back garden of the Xing mansion became quiet again. Xing Jing and his wife didn't have time to check on the injuries of the stewards and servants. They looked at He Mingxi with many questions. If it weren't for this person, they would have been killed tonight. But it was obvious that this person was the culprit of the chaos in Chang'an tonight. Otherwise, why would the mob and the leader retreat after seeing his eyes? "I heard that you will become the nation master of the Tang Empire," Xing Jing said. He Mingxi smiled and said, "I don't think I will have such a chance." Xing Jing said in a cold voice, "You did such a bloody thing, so of course you are not qualified." He Mingxi was talking about opportunities while he was talking about qualifications. They were expressing different meanings. "I never said I was a good person." He Mingxi looked at him and said, "So you don't have to scold me, and you don't have to ask me why I let the Xing mansion go tonight. Because I don't understand it myself. You are the birth parents of the Yama girl. Why can't you die?" He Mingxi murmured to himself. It seemed that he was really confused, but he couldn't figure out the reason. He shook his head and left the Xing mansion. The crowd left, but the gate of the Xing mansion had been broken. It was very unsafe on this chaotic night. What was more troublesome was that someone had lit a fire in the front yard, and the fire was getting bigger and bigger. Xing Jing and his wife, as well as the injured family members, walked out of the mansion one by one. After the horse carriages were set up, they went to the Yanming Lake and hid in their son-in-law's yard for the night. At this moment, dozens of men in green shirts and pants ran over with short knives in their hands. The leader of the group heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that Xing Jing and his wife were fine. "Sir, Mr. Qi asked me to take you to the Spring Breeze Pavilion. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 725. In the dark of the night, many figures jumped over the wall and sneaked into the garden. He Mingqi had many loyal subordinates in the South School of Haotian Taoism and the Imperial Center administration over the years. Although there were not many of them, the lethality they caused was terrible. Li Huiyuan was enraged by the assassination, so he gave him the waste token of the Imperial Center administration and told him to do whatever he wanted. That night, at least a dozen officials fell in pools of blood, and more innocent people died in the chaos. The officials and soldiers sent by the imperial court to guard the guild hall of Qinghe County were also in a mess. They did not notice that many descendants of the warlords of Qinghe County had taken advantage of the chaos to escape. After these people left the guild hall, they quickly met with the officials secretly supported by the warlords of Qinghe County. According to the investigation, the chaos in Chang on that night had something to do with these people. Xing Jing and his family were taken to the Chao Mansion on the 2nd Street of Spring Breeze Pavilion. The servants had their own arrangements, and the injured were treated by the doctors of the Fish Dragon Gang. Xing Jing brought his wife to visit Old Master Chao. The main hall of the Chao Mansion was brightly lit. Before Xing Jing could sincerely express his gratitude, Old Master Chao waved his hand to stop him. The old man, who usually only liked to listen to dramas and tease his grandson, looked at the worried Linzi and said impatiently, "Daughter-in-law, don't worry. As long as your man is alive, no one will dare to make trouble in the mansion. Those who have the guts to attack our house have already gone to the imperial palace." Xing Jing listened to the old man's words and could not help but shiver. He thought that the old man must have retired from the battlefield. When someone next to him saluted, he realized that there was someone else in the hall. Old Master Chao looked at Chang Siwei and scolded, "The brother and sister in the imperial palace are idiots. Are you an idiot too? If you don't go with the Yulin royal guards to fight against the barbarians, then you have to protect Chang and... What are you hesitating for? Kill anyone who dares to be on the street at this time. Kill any cultivator who dares to show his face." Chang Siwei accepted the order and left in a hurry. Mr. Qi was also in the hall. The Fish Dragon Gang was the local tyrant of Chang'an. No matter how chaotic the situation was, they could handle it easily. His brothers in the gang did not suffer any losses tonight. Only a few of them were killed by cultivators at the gate of the Xing Mansion. Mr. Qi was very angry, but he didn't dare to show it in front of Old Master Chao. He asked, "Erba, what did the brothers in the gang do? The brothers in the gang have to do something, right?" Old Master Chao gently stroked his beard. Before he could give any advice, he heard the steward's voice coming from outside the hall, saying that the prefectural magistrate of Chang'an City, Lord Shangguan, had come to visit Old Master Chao. Old Master Chao's eyes lit up. "Here's what you need to do." Lord Shangguan Yangyu hurriedly walked into the main hall of the Chao Mansion and bowed to Old Master Chao as his nephew. Then he found that Xing Jing was also there, and his expression turned serious. "Your Excellency, you are more cunning than this old man. I don't think you have anything to ask me. If you are looking for Qi For, you can go and talk to him. I will bring your Excellency Xing to the back garden." After saying this, Old Master Chao walked out of the hall with Xing Jing. Shangguan Yangyu looked at the back of Old Master Chao, and his wretched triangular eyes lit up. Then he bowed again with great respect and said, "Old Master Chao, you are too polite." Old Master Chao didn't look back and said, Your Excellency is the one who is too polite. When old Master Chow and Xing Jing completely disappeared, Shangguan Yangyu straightened up and looked at Mr. Qi. After a moment of silence he asked, "It seems that you are ready to side with Her Majesty?" Mr. Qi said with a smile, "Your Excellency, what are you talking about? We are poor people in Jianghu. How can we be qualified to make a choice on such an important matter? We will do whatever the imperial court says." Shangguan Yangyu sneered and thought that these people were not ordinary people in Jianghu. But he didn't bother to point it out. Thinking that time was tight, he said directly, "Grand Master Qi, I am here to borrow people from you." Mr. Qi was slightly stunned and didn't understand what he meant. He said tentatively, "Your Excellency, you are joking. You are in charge of the Chang and local government. At this moment, I don't want to say those secretive words to you." Shangguan Yangyu looked serious and said, "The Yulin royal guards have to suppress the chaos. The bodyguards have to protect the safety of the palace. My runners and supervisors have to deal with the aftermath and murder cases and maintain public order. I really don't have the manpower, so I want to borrow people from you. Are you going to give them to me or not?" Mr. Qi had been dealing with Shangguan Yangyu for a long time, but it was the first time that he saw Shangguan Yangyu being so serious. His wretched face actually showed some sense of righteousness, so he couldn't help but become serious. "It is my duty to serve the imperial court. But I want to know why you want to borrow people." Many people ran away from the guild hall of Qinghe Prefecture. Two cold lights flashed in Shangguan Yangyu's triangular eyes. He said, "The temples of these long-haired monks are in the south. If they run away, everything will be over. Fortunately, there are enemies invading and the city gate of Chang and will be closed at night. They can't run out for the time being. But now there are only 6 hours left before the city gate is opened." Mr. Qi understood what Shangguan Yangyu meant. He thought for a while and said, "No problem. The Fish Dragon Gang can provide as many people as you want. If we don't have enough brothers, I can also send some boys. It's better to see living people. If it doesn't work, dead people will also count." Shangguan Yangyu said, "And it's better to find more boys for this matter. Those under you who are armed and dare to kill people have to do another important thing for me." Mr. Qi asked, "Your Excellency, please tell me." Shangguan Yangyu said after a moment of silence, "The chaos in Chang and tonight is mainly caused by those cultivators. Even if the Yulin royal guards can suppress the street, they can't find those cultivators." Hearing this, Mr. Qi was shocked and said, "My brothers in the gang are no match for those cultivators." Shangguan Yangyu said, "I don't need your men to kill or capture those cultivators. I just need your men to stop those cultivators from attacking ordinary people." Mr. Qi frowned and said, "The cultivators are either in the Imperial Center Administration or the Southern Gate Temple. Not to mention the Fish Dragon Gang. Even if Your Excellency signed the government order and sent the Yamen runners there, it wouldn't work. There are many things that the Chang and local government can't do, but the Fish Dragon Gang can. I got these papers from the military ministry last year. They are the home addresses of the officials and deacons of the Imperial Center Administration, as well as the married Taoists of the Southern Gate Temple. Their old parents, weak wives, and young children should still be at home." Shangguan Yangyu took out a thick stack of papers from his arms with a kind expression and said, "The Fish Dragon Gang is the local tyrant of Chang'an. It's easy to find these places and to invite these women and children to a secret place." Mr. Qi took the addresses and came to himself after a while. He felt a little cold. Looking at the loving face of His Excellency, he said in a trembling voice, "This is too cruel." Shangguan Yangyu sighed and said, "Actually, I don't want to do this, but the most important thing is to be cruel." Mr. Qi recalled the conversation between old Master Chow and Shangguan Yangyu before he left the main hall. He finally understood the real meaning and could not help admiring Shangguan Yangyu, but also feeling a little uneasy. Whether it's the Qinghe County Guild Hall or the Imperial Center Administration or the Southern Gate Temple, they are not your duty. Mr. Qi asked confusedly, why did you take such a big risk to do this? Shangguan Yangyu stroked his beard and was about to say something. Mr. Qi saw his expression and knew what he wanted to say. He said, no one in the imperial court will believe that you are a selfless person. So please don't use this reason. I am indeed timid and greedy for money. It's unreasonable to say that I love the Tang Empire. However, if there is no Tang Empire, how can an ugly person like me be an official? How can I be the prefectural magistrate of the capital city? Shangguan Yangyu sighed and said, if the Tang Empire is really destroyed, where can I go to be greedy for money? It's not complicated, so I understand. But it's strange that many people don't understand. Li Yu walked slowly into the hall. She looked very tired, and so were her steps. The news of Qinghe County's rebellion and independence made her feel like a sudden hailstorm after more than 10 days of heavy rain. What she had just learned was like a bolt of lightning falling from a hailstorm. She walked to the bed and looked at her pale brother, who was obviously still in a state of panic. She couldn't help but feel sorry for him. Then she laughed at herself and asked gently, was it your Majesty who did it? Li Huiyuan saw that her tone was still as gentle as usual and immediately felt relieved. He said with a smile, yes, those traitors wanted to kill me, so I killed them all. Li Yu sat beside the bed and said after a moment of silence, General Su Shi also wanted to kill you? The smile on Li Huiyuan's face suddenly became a little stiff. He said, what are you talking about, sister? Li Yu said softly, Wang Jinglu entered Chang'an yesterday. After he went to the military ministry to find out the news, he came to the palace to see me tonight. That's why I thought of asking you. Li Huiyuan's voice was slightly trembling. He forced a smile and said, what do you want to ask me, sister? Li Yu's expression was still very calm. She said lightly, Qinghe County has rebelled. The hierarch lord of the Divine Hall went around Shao Mountain and entered the Tang Empire. It's understandable that the Imperial Center Administration, the secret guards, and the spies of the military ministry did not find out. But how did the hierarch lord know that the general was stationed at the foot of Shao Mountain? I didn't even know that the general was staying at Shao Mountain that night. How did the Divine Hall know? Li Yu looked into his eyes and continued to ask. The general is a confident and proud person, but he has always been cautious on the battlefield. So I really want to know, how did you know? The smile on Li Huiyuan's face became more and more stiff, and even more like he was crying. At this time, a calm voice sounded outside the quiet palace door. Over the years, many cultivators of the South School of Haotian Taoism have joined the army. Now that I am the South School Lord, those people will naturally not think of hiding it from me. The Imperial Center Administration and the military ministry have a closer relationship, and I happen to be in charge of the Imperial Center Administration under His Majesty's orders. So I was very lucky to get the general's return route. The palace door opened and He Mingqi walked in. He held the yellow oiled paper umbrella, which had been somewhat deformed, and bowed slightly to the siblings beside the bed. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 726. After a long time, Li Yu finally turned around. Her movements were a little slow because of exhaustion. She looked at He Mingqi and said, it seems that the chaos in Chang'an and tonight is also caused by you. Yes. He Mingqi said, Chang'an is like a weak patient now. Chao Xiaoshu, whom I fear the most, has left. Once the chaos starts, no one can stop it. Li Yu said, it seems that the Divine Hall really doesn't understand the Tang people's style. We don't like chaos, so no matter how this chaos ends, it will end soon. Your Highness, what's the point of arguing now? He Mingqi looked at her and said with a smile, just like what the hierarch lord said in the letter to you, you are the one who will face the disaster. The disaster of the Tang Empire will fall on you. Your selfishness and greed are the cause of this disaster. You can't escape from the disaster, so just surrender. Li Yu said, although you have pretended to be a Tang for so many years, you still don't understand us, just like the Divine Hall. In our world, there is no such thing as surrender. He Mingqi clapped his hands and said, it's loud and clear, but it's empty. Haotian is invincible, Haotian Taoism is eternal, the headmaster is dead, the former emperor is dead, what can the Tang Empire do now? I promised my teacher that I would make the Tang people bleed less, so I hope you will fail as soon as possible. Li Huiyuan listened to the conversation and realized what a big mistake he had made. He was agitated and pale, murmuring, "You are from the Divine Hall, you are from the West Hill Divine Palace. Then why did you save me in the Imperial Garden? Why did you save the Emperor of the Tang Empire?" He Mingqi looked at him and said with pity, "An absurd emperor like your majesty is the best friend of Haotian Taoism. You are more valuable alive than dead. Although your highness's recent performance has surprised everyone, your ability still alarmed the Divine Hall. If possible, I will try to kill you. However, it is indeed difficult to kill a member of the Li family in the Imperial Palace of the Tang Empire. Lord Su Chongshan has already tried for me." He looked at Li Yu and said, "But I don't think your highness has the ability to keep me here." After saying this, He Mingqi turned around and walked out of the hall. He did not walk fast, as if he was not worried that Li Yu would call the guards. His calm attitude was undoubtedly the greatest humiliation to the siblings by the bed. Walking out of the palace, he borrowed the darkest light of the night before dawn to walk into the depths of the Imperial Garden. Arriving in front of the small building, he raised his head to glance at the sky that was about to rain, and opened the yellow paper umbrella. The yellow paper umbrella had already been severely damaged by Su Chongshan's 2 punches. After it was opened, it looked somewhat comical, but the qi that the umbrella exuded at this moment was sacred and solemn. As he opened the umbrella, many lines suddenly appeared on the vast stone ground in the depths of the small building. Those lines represented the God-stunning array and Chang and city. The sacred and solemn atmosphere seeped into those lines. The brilliance gradually shone and then gradually faded away after a while. If there was a divine talisman master or a great formation master present, they would probably be able to see some subtle changes. There were some obstructions in the middle of some lines, as if there were carriages blocking the Vermilion Bird Avenue in Chang'an City. Standing among the autumn trees in the Imperial Garden, He Mingqi silently sensed the changes underground. After confirming that it was similar to what he had expected, he nodded with satisfaction. Now Taoism only needed to find the array-I pestle to break the God-stunning array. If the God-stunning array was broken, Chang'an City would be destroyed. If Chang'an City was destroyed, the Tang Empire would be destroyed. Now the array-I of the God-stunning array was in the academy in the south of the city. He could stroll in the heavily guarded Imperial Palace, but he did not have any confidence to go to the academy to get it. However, it did not mean that no one in the world could get it. In the quiet palace, there was a crisp sound of a slap. Li Huiyuan covered his red and swollen cheek, and blood dripped from the corner of his mouth. He looked at his sister in fear, crying and shouting, "I know I was wrong, but what can I do now that I've done it? How could I know that he was from Taoism? That old bastard Li Qingshan lied to us." Li Yu trembled with anger. She felt dizzy and almost fainted. "Sister, sister." Li Huiyuan climbed up from the bed and held her hand tightly with his uninjured hand. He said in a trembling voice, "Now there is no other way. We can only surrender to the Divine Hall." Li Yu looked at him and suddenly realized that she did not know the brother she had raised. She slapped him heavily in the face again without any expression on her face. Li Huiyuan seemed to feel no pain at all. His eyes were a little enlarged, but he still held her hand tightly and did not let her get rid of him. he screamed. "The headmaster is dead! The headmaster is dead! Even the headmaster is dead! Who can fight against heaven? The academy cannot support the Tang Empire. Don't you see that the people inside are not moving? We can only rely on ourselves and Taoism. What else can we do? What should we do?" A strand of hair fell on Li Yu's forehead. She shook her head tiredly and said, "The academy cannot support the Tang Empire. Then I have to continue to support it until I can't. We can't support it anymore." Li Huiyuan's voice was extremely hoarse because of nervousness, fear, and confusion. He said, "Even if the Southern Army does not go to the north, they have to go around the Shao Mountain to reach the verdant canyon. The army of the West Hill Divine Palace has now passed the Great Lake and will soon pass the Qinghe County. They will soon go straight to Chang." And Li Yu lowered her head weakly and said, "Chang'an can't be broken." Li Huiyuan said in a trembling voice, "They don't need to break it. They just need to surround Chang'an. There are so many people in the city. Where can we find food?" Li Yu raised her head and gently combed her brother's messy hair. She smiled miserably and said, "In fact, after listening to what you said, I think you are very smart. But why did you get confused earlier?" She had always been praised as a virtuous person by the court officials. Even her father loved and trusted her a lot. She was very capable in both governing and strategizing. But she was a tired and helpless woman at this time. The headmaster of the academy had left and the whole world was against the Tang Empire. This was a big change that had not happened in 1,000 years. Even if her father was still alive, it would be extremely difficult for him to face such a situation, let alone her. "We are the Tangs. We can't surrender." Li Yu reached out and gently caressed her brother's cheek. She said very seriously, "Even if we fight to the last moment, we can't surrender. Even if you die, you have to die in the palace. Do you hear me?" At this moment, a eunuch hurried into the hall and brought the news he had just received from the military ministry. General Su Qi had sent cavalry to escort the Empress and the 6th Prince to Wuzhou. Li Yu was silent. Li Huiyuan opened his eyes wide in shock. The titles of the previous chapter and this chapter are all people's names. I always used this kind of title when I was chronicling Qingxi. Later, when I forgot what I was writing, I did the same. Now that I think about it, He Yu of the Gaik are all important people. Moreover, I have a preference for Shangguan Yangyu and the General of the Night. It's a pity that I can't write too much. Besides, this is the 10th chapter. Let's not talk about anything else. There will be an update today. Do you still have a monthly ticket? To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 727. He Mingqi's appearance and departure had greatly impacted Li Huiyuan's mind. When he heard the news, his face turned paler and his eyes were filled with fear. "How did they come back so soon?" he said in a trembling voice. Li Yu sat down slowly with no expression. If it had been a few days ago, she would not have reacted this way after hearing the news. With the return of the Tang army in Helan City, the fact that she tampered with the edict must have been exposed. She had prepared many measures in advance. However, with the West Hill Divine Palace calling for the world to fight against the Tang Empire, those measures had lost the possibility of success. The eunuch said in a low voice, "Eunuch Chen from the Department of Rights is in the south of Wuzhou. He should have received the news in advance and is on his way. He should be able to stop them." Li Yu was silent for a long time and then asked tiredly, "How many people from the northern battlefront army are accompanying them?" The eunuch replied in a low voice, "It is reported that there are 500 elite cavalrymen." The number of people accompanying them was neither too many nor too few, which made Li Yu unable to judge General Su Qi's intentions. She suddenly thought of a possibility and asked, "Who else is there?" The eunuch hesitated and said, "I heard that Mr. 13 of the Academy is also with them." Hearing this name, Li Yu slightly frowned. The fear in Li Huiyuan's eyes became more and more intense. He had said that the academy was useless now that the headmaster of the academy was dead. But in fact, as a Tang, especially as a prince, how could he not know what the academy meant to the Tang Empire? How could he not be afraid? Royal sister, we have to do something. He looked at Li Yu and said nervously. He Mingqi has made his attitude clear. The academy will definitely support that woman. At this time, we have no other choice but to do as he Mingqi says. Who could resist the academy? Looking at the world, only Haotian Taoism could do it. Li Yu shook her head slowly and said, I don't want to hear you say that again. Li Huiyuan swallowed, and did not give up trying to persuade her. He hurriedly said, surrendering doesn't mean the end of the Tang Empire. Taoism needs someone to rule the secular world and collect resources for them. Destroying the Tang Empire will do them no good. Compared to the barbarians of the Golden Palace, aren't we more suitable? The more he spoke, the more he felt that it made sense. He stood up excitedly and waved his arms, saying, Those who opposed us have been killed by He Mingqi. We will push the blame on the Southern Gate Temple at tomorrow's court meeting. Royal sister, you can ask the ministers who are loyal to you to stand up and support us in reaching an agreement with the West Hill Divine Palace. Then the whole thing can be solved. How do we reach an agreement? Cede the land and pay reparations, disband the South School of Haotian Taoism, and seal the academy? Or should we kowtow on Peach Mountain and beg for Haotian's forgiveness? Li Yu smiled at him and said, You said that the Tang Empire is more suitable than the barbarians of the Golden Palace. More suitable for what? Is he more suitable to be a dog of the Tao sect? Her heart was dead. Her right hand trembled slightly, but she did not slap Li Huiyuan's face like before because she found that it was meaningless. All these years, because of my mother, I always felt sorry for you. So I spoiled you, loved you, and pitied you. I didn't expect that I would spoil you like this. Li Yu stood up and was ready to leave the palace. Still holding her hand, Li Huiyuan was brought down from the bed. He looked at Li Yu's back and shouted in horror, Royal sister, are you going to kill me? Li Yu smiled sadly and said, You are my brother. I promised my mother that I would take good care of you. Why would I kill you? Now I finally understand what He Mingqi meant. Your Majesty, no matter how shameless you are, as long as you are alive, I will protect you. I can't let that woman hurt you. The Tang Empire, which is in a storm, will fall into internal strife because of my selfishness. How can the West Hill Divine Palace not be happy to see this? The world was in chaos and the Tang Empire was in danger because of the departure of the headmaster of the academy and His Majesty. No one thought that the Tang Empire could still be as powerful as before. However, the Tang Empire's performance in this war was even more disappointing than people had expected, especially the academy in the south of Chang'an. The academy was the foundation of the Tang Empire and the guardian of the Tang Empire. Even if the headmaster of the academy had left, there were still many powerhouses and scheming bigwigs in the academy. What confused many invaders and disappointed and angered all the Tangs was that the academy had remained silent since the beginning of the war. When the West Hill Divine Palace's edict calling for the world to fight against the Tang Empire spread throughout the world, the academy had closed its doors. To be more precise, the doors of the academy had never been opened since the moment the headmaster of the academy ascended to heaven. The academy did not have a main door, only a side door. The side door of the academy led directly to the back of the mountain. That was the real door. The newly recruited students in the front yard were dismissed on the spot. They took the letters written by the professors of the academy and left the stone square with their luggage. They went to Chang'an City and worked for the imperial court. As for the instructors of the academy, they received a letter from the back of the mountain. The letter said calmly that those who wanted to stay in the academy could stay, and those who wanted to leave could leave. Chao Jifeng, the associate professor of etiquette, was a Yen. He chose to leave. The two instructors of mathematics were from the South Jin Kingdom, but they insisted on staying. According to statistics, 70% of the instructors from foreign countries ended up staying in the academy. In their words, they were from the South Jin Kingdom, Yueluan Kingdom, Song Empire, and West Hill Empire. They were not Tangs, but they were from the academy. After that, there was still no movement from the academy. There were no more letters from the back of the mountain. Some professors were nowhere to be found, and the rest of the instructors had to stay in the front yard behind the closed doors to do their own studies. Even if the world was going to be destroyed tomorrow, they still had to do what they had to do. One day in late autumn, Chang'an City gradually calmed down from the chaos, but it was not completely peaceful yet. The Yulin royal guards rode on horses and vigilantly watched the street. The runners of the Chang'an local government were busy running around, and the Fish Dragon gang were looking for the people they wanted to find in the narrow alleys and dark brothels. The city gate department was ordered to close the city gates. Except for the caravans that delivered grain to the states near the capital, no one was allowed to enter or leave. Chang'an City became an isolated city, and they could no longer care about anything outside the city. The academy was located in the south of Chang'an City, so it was naturally outside the city. When Chang'an City became an isolated city, the academy also entered a situation of isolation and helplessness. A giant chariot appeared in the meadow outside the academy's gate. Many of the layers of gauze had been torn, and the railings carved from gold and jade had many gaps and dirty old bloodstains. But it still looked solemn and dignified. There were 64 powerful West Hill Divine Guards beside the giant chariot, but now there were only a dozen left. The rest had died in the earth-shattering battle under the Shao Mountain that night. There was a tall figure in the thousands of layers of gauze in the chariot. The tall figure's left hand was broken, but it still shone brightly. It even seemed to suppress the brilliance of the academy. The hierarch lord of the West Hill Divine Palace came to the academy. In the Shao Mountain that night, he killed the Defender General of the Tang Empire, Su Shi. For this, dozens of West Hill Divine Guards were sacrificed, and he also paid a heavy price with his left hand. But at this time, he was still so powerful, even more powerful than before. Su Shi died in his hands. That was the reason. More than a dozen West Hill Divine Guards carried the giant chariot to the meadow. Because the number of people had decreased, the West Hill Divine Guards seemed to be struggling and moved very slowly. But the slower they moved, the greater the pressure in front of the academy's stone square. The autumn wind seemed to be squeezed and began to wail. The academy did not have a gate, so the giant chariot did not break in. There was a stone square in the academy. The giant chariot did not stop, and the stone square broke into countless pieces. Hearing the loud noise, the instructors in the front yard put down their pens and paper and hurried out of their rooms. Then they saw the giant chariot. Although they were the instructors in the front yard, they were all knowledgeable people who had read countless books and classics. Someone immediately recognized who the tall figure in the giant chariot was. There was a cry of shock in the front yard of the academy. All the instructors showed a look of horror on their faces. The hierarch lord of the West Hill Divine Palace had come to the south of Chang'an to the academy. Had the Tang Empire been destroyed? The hierarch lord slowly swept his thunderous eyes across the faces of the instructors through the broken gauze curtains. There was no emotion on his face. He asked, "Where is Huang He?" No one answered him, because Professor Huang He had disappeared many days ago. The hierarch lord's voice sounded again on the front yard of the academy like thunder. "Where is Mu Chu?" Still no one answered. The hierarch lord then asked the names of several professors. Those people were not in the academy. The hierarch lord did not see any trace of the Tang army. He said, "The academy has sheltered the Tang Empire for thousands of years, but now it has been forgotten by Chang'an. What a pity!" The giant chariot was lifted again and walked to the back of the academy. These ordinary academy instructors were not in the eyes of Haotian Taoism. The hierarch lord knew very well where the Real Academy was. The giant chariot passed through a narrow alley which collapsed on both sides. It passed through a wetland, and the fish in the water grass fled in fear. When it passed through the old library, the hierarch lord looked up at a window on the second floor. Then the giant chariot continued forward and entered the perennial clouds and mist on the mountainside of the academy. The aura of heaven and earth suddenly moved. The giant chariot broke through the grand array that was not controlled by the headmaster. There was no way out of the beautiful mountains and clear waters. There was a cliff plateau at the end of the tunnel. The warm mountain breeze that was not like the autumn wind blew the gauze curtains on the giant chariot. The hierarch lord looked at the scenery in front of him and was speechless. He had planned for his whole life, and what he wanted to do most was to destroy the academy. Today, he finally came to the back of the academy. There was a pine tree in front of the cliff, but there was no boy under the pine tree. There were only two people playing chess. The hierarch lord looked through the gauze and fell on the chessboard. He said, "I didn't expect that Mr. Song Qian was really meditating in the back of the academy." The fifth brother put down a black chess piece and then stood up. He bowed to the giant chariot that broke through the fog and said, "Song Qian and my younger brother greet the hierarch lord." The eighth brother angrily objected and said, "I have a name. Why do I need you to bring me?" The fifth brother said, "The hierarch lord knows me, but he doesn't know you. This means that it is universally acknowledged that my chess skills are better than yours." The eighth brother became angrier after hearing this. He threw the white chess piece in his hand heavily on the chessboard. There was a crisp sound and the black and white chess pieces on the chessboard rolled restlessly. The scenery of the back of the academy changed. The waterfall in the distance seemed to be still, the mirror lake on the cliff was rippling, the pine trees on the mountain seemed to have turned into countless soldiers, and the grass and flowers were like indifferent audiences. The back of the academy turned into a chessboard, full of killing intent. The hierarch lord looked at the two under the pine trees and said, "You have already surpassed the Lank Temple by comprehending the mysteries of heaven on the chessboard. However, you don't know what real killing intent is." His voice was very soft, but after it passed through the gauze, it turned into countless muffled thunder. The thunder exploded in the back of the academy. The silver waterfall trembled slightly, the mirror lake swayed slightly, and the wind blew through the mountains. The pine trees rustled, and the grass and flowers bowed in fear. The chessboard showed signs of collapsing. More than 10 West Hill Divine Guards carried the giant chariot and continued to the back of the mountain. At this moment, a shrill wolf howl suddenly sounded in the mountain peak. The sound of water splashing came from behind the iron-making house. The water wheel was rolling and a big white goose stood on it. It slowly rose out of the eaves and bent its neck to sing to the sky. The song was loud and clear. On the meadow further away, an old yellow bull slowly raised its head and glanced at the pine forest. With the appearance of the old yellow bull, the big white goose, and the little white wolf, the black and white chessboard in the back of the mountain of the academy suddenly became stable, and the killing intent became even more awe-inspiring. The chess pieces were not black and white, but had distinctive features. Soldier, a brave soldier. Soldier, a proud national soldier. Chariot, a chariot that could carry 10,000 people. The pine trees continued to rustle, and the aura of heaven and earth in the back of the mountain of the academy turned into countless killing intents, attacking the giant chariot. The dozen West Hill Divine Guards beside the chariot suddenly turned pale and spat out blood. Among the layers of gauze, the tall figure leaned forward slightly, and finally became more serious. Abandoning the appearance of the chessboard and merging the two intents, the two of you are really good. It's a pity that this game is missing a few pieces. A horse is missing, and a marshal and a general are missing. The whole world is against the Tang Empire. How can the West Hill Divine Palace think that the Academy will really stand by and do nothing? I've even guessed where Mr. First and the others have gone, but they will never come back. Everything has been arranged to leave Chang'an City empty, and the disciples of the Academy exhausted, so that I can come to the back of the mountain with peace of mind, and take what I want. Today, I come to the academy to take the eye pestle of the god-stunning array. With the eye pestle in hand, I have Chong An city, and the Tang Empire will be destroyed by my hands. The hierarch shouted, and then he laughed happily. His laughter echoed in the quiet back of the mountain of the academy. The academy is empty now. There is no marshal or general, only you two idiots who are obsessed with chess, and these beasts. How can you stop me? The hierarch lord looked at the two under the pine and shouted, even if you can trap me in this game of chess, how long can you do it? Beasts will always be beasts. Don't even think about going against heaven's way to become a human, and how can a human go against heaven's way? The academy will be destroyed, and the Tang Empire will also be destroyed. What countless sages and mighty figures of Haotian Taoism have failed to do for thousands of years will become reality in my hands. I will become the most dazzling god in Haotian's divine kingdom. The fifth brother and the eighth brother under the pine suddenly turned pale. The howling of the wolves in the mountains became weaker, and the big white goose standing on the water cart no longer sang to the sky. Blood dripped from its beak, and the old yellow bull on the meadow looked more and more tired. Behind the gauze, the hierarch lord's figure looked extremely tall and shining. And more. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 728. The western plateau of the Tang Empire faced the towering Pamir Mountains. Xu Qing, the great general of the West, commanded the Western Army to fight several battles with the enemies of the Yueluan Kingdom. Although the Western Army was the least valued and the weakest in the Tang Empire, it was very strong against the cavalry of the Yueluan Kingdom and had won many battles, until a group of ascetic monks came from the Pamir Mountains. At this time, the Western Army of the Tang Empire had surrounded the Chaoyang cavalry of the Yueluan Kingdom and was about to destroy the enemy. However, the ascetic monks walked past the battlefield silently as if they could not see the tragic scene. They were the ascetic monks from the Xiankong Temple. The ascetic monk at the front had only 7 fingers. He was the chief monk of the Hall of Respect of the Xiankong Temple, Master Chi Mei. Master Chi Mei walked towards the Tang army's camp, his footsteps slow and steady. Countless arrows landed on his body, but they were unable to pierce through his skin and fell to the ground. Countless padeos fell on his body, but they couldn't make him tremble in the slightest. Master Chi Mei did not fight back. He just walked silently towards the Tang army's camp. He walked towards the great general of the West, Xu Qing. Xu Qing felt a little bitter in his mouth, and smiled helplessly. As the main general, he knew that he could not retreat. Then he would die here. The army of the West Hill Divine Palace finally arrived at the shore of the Great Swamp on the warships of the South Jin Kingdom Navy. The Tang Navy's warships were anchored by the shore and there was no movement. A few warships had traces of fire, and the largest one had sunk to the bottom of the water. The people of Qinghe County welcomed the invaders with complicated expressions. In the words of the warlords, the army of the West Hill Divine Palace was a sacred liberator. The military discipline of the West Hill Divine Palace was much better than what the people of Qinghe County had imagined. Even the soldiers of the South Jin Kingdom, who had a grudge against Qinghe County, did not look sideways when they walked on the street. 2 sacred sedans and several luxurious carriages were behind the army of the Divine Hall. The great divine priest of Revelation personally went to the Chui Garden by the Fuchin River to meet the warlords of Qinghe County and bless them. The great divine priest of Judgment did not care about these things. She was looking forward to meeting the powerhouses of the Tang Empire. The luxurious carriages were very quiet. Although they did not see it with their own eyes, everyone had already guessed that the world's most powerful person, Sword Saint Lu Bai, was probably in the carriage. What kind of big shots were sitting in the other carriages? The army of the West Hill Divine Palace did not stay in Qinghe Prefecture for too long. The horses galloped across the quiet bluestone path, crossed the exquisite stone bridge, passed through the houses with white walls and black eaves, and headed north. Finally, they arrived at the periphery of the famous verdant canyon. Countless experts of the world walked toward the Great Tang. The Great Tang was on the verge of destruction. There seemed to be nothing that could stop this from happening. At this time, Ning Ke accompanied the Empress and the sixth prince. They left Wuzhou and continued on their way to Chang'an. He did not know of the perilous situation in the south, but he could guess at what the Great Tang was facing. But in the face of such overwhelming momentum, not even he had the power to change anything. The only thing he could do was to return to Chang'an, and as soon as possible. The headmaster built Chang'an city and set up the God-stunning array. Master Yen Sei passed the array pestle of the God-stunning array to him. He had inherited the legacy of the two teachers, so he had to guard it well. As long as he could return to Chang'an and take back the array pestle, he could at least guarantee that Chang'an would not fall. They traveled day and night. After traveling for 200 miles from Wuzhou, the Empress and her entourage were stopped on a bridge near Liangxiang. They were stopped by a group of prefectural soldiers from Liangshan State, led by a eunuch. The Grand Secretary of the Hall of Illustrious Persons, Mo Han, was from Liangshan State. The eunuch, Chen Jingxian, was the chief eunuch of the Department of Rites. Before the war, he was ordered to Liangshan State for official business. After hearing the news of the Empress's return to the south, he did not even have time to ask Chang'an city before he led the prefectural soldiers from Liangshan State to stop them. Eunuch Chen stood in the middle of the stone bridge and looked at the carriage. He bowed and said proudly, "His Majesty has decreed that Chang'an city is in danger. Empress Dowager, please stop here and choose a place to hide." Ning Ke rode on the horse and did not speak. The Empress' calm voice came from the carriage. "Eunuch Chen, where is the decree? I would like to take a look." Eunuch Chen's expression stiffened slightly, but his voice became tougher. He said, "This is His Majesty's verbal decree." "I see." Ning Ke said, "I am talking about the siblings in the palace. They are not so stupid." Upon hearing this, Eunuch Chen's expression became extremely ugly. He shouted, "How dare you? How dare you be so disrespectful to His Majesty and the Regent Princess?" Then he looked at the carriage and said coldly, "Empress Dowager, are you going to defy the decree?" The Empress said, "In name, I am still their mother. Isn't the verbal decree too disrespectful? It is also against the laws of the Tang Empire. How can I follow the decree?" Eunuch Chen frowned slightly and said, "According to the laws of the Tang Empire during wartime," before he could finish, Ning Ke's brows were already furrowed. He looked back at the carriage and said, "We have already wasted some time. I do not want to waste time on these trivial matters." The Empress said softly, "The laws of the Tang Empire must be followed." Ning Ke shook his head and said, "Empress, you can guard. I do not need to guard." The Empress said, "Then what are you going to do?" Ning Ke said, "I will kill the messenger, and Empress will naturally be able to cross the bridge." After a moment of silence, the Empress said, "That makes sense." Upon hearing this, Eunuch Chen could not help but be extremely angry. He took the horsewhip and lashed it heavily on the bridge. He shouted, "Who are you? How dare you say that you will kill an angel?" When he was in the palace, he was famous for being good at using the whip. His Majesty had also taken notice of this, and thus gave him the opportunity to climb up the ranks. At this moment, the whip was extremely loud and clear. Ning Ke glanced to the side. A commander of the northern battlefront army rode forward and slapped the eunuch's face hard. The sound of the slap was extremely clear and loud, far louder than the previous sound of the whip. Eunuch Chen was stunned. The commander of the cavalry snatched the whip from his hand and threw it into the river under the stone bridge. Then he pulled out his sword from the sheath and pointed at the hundreds of prefectural soldiers on the other side of the stone bridge. He said expressionlessly, "Charge." The sound of hooves could be heard. 500 Tang cavalrymen charged toward the other side of the bridge, with a cloud of dust in their wake. The prefectural soldiers of Liangzhou could not fight against these ferocious regular cavalrymen. They could only hear cries of alarm as their flags fell and their horses ran away. In a moment, they were scattered and fled in all directions. The eunuch on the stone bridge was already covered in blood from being trampled by the messy hooves. He was unconscious and no one knew if he was alive or dead. Ning Ke pulled the reins lightly and came to the window. He looked at the chaotic scene under the bridge and said, "When I was in the academy, I read a few history books in my spare time. Every time I saw those princes and generals being humiliated by eunuchs or civil officials just because of the emperor's edict, and they gathered their troops but did not dare to cross the river. I found it unbelievable." The empress pulled the curtains and said, "This is the etiquette that the headmaster cares about the most. Without the etiquette, this world is a chaotic one. It will always be in the dark hours where the strong prey on the weak." Ning Ke said, "The first lesson I learned in the academy was etiquette. At that time, Professor Chao Jifeng told us that the rules of the academy are very simple. Whoever is stronger has the final say. This is etiquette. There are. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 729. The road home was always so long, and there were always obstacles. When the Empress and her entourage arrived at the post station 14 miles north of Chang'an, they were stopped again. This time, the ones who stopped them were not eunuchs, nor were there any soldiers. It was a dozen white-haired ministers. Those old officials knelt in front of the Empress' carriage, representing His Majesty and the kingdom's supervisor to pass on the edict, asking the Empress not to enter the city for now and to stay in the West Mountainside Palace. Looking at the scene in front of him, Ning Ke could not help but admire Li Yu. In the past few years, many old ministers had passed away due to illness. He did not know where she had found so many old and virtuous ministers whose bodies were like rotten wood. Among these old ministers kneeling on the ground, he even saw the former teacher of the sixth prince. The old ministers wept, their white hair fluttering in the autumn wind. It truly made those who saw it sad and those who heard it shed tears. They spoke of the perilous situation of the world and the difficulties of the country. They spoke from the bottom of their hearts and spoke from the bottom of their hearts. The commander of the Northern Army, who was responsible for escorting the Queen and her entourage, was in a dilemma. These old men did not do anything, nor did they issue a decree. They just knelt in front of the carriages. The commander could not really kill them. Ning Ke didn't care about this and walked toward those elders. At this time, people in Chang'an already knew that apart from the cavalry of the Northern Army, Ning Ke, Mr. 13 of the Academy, was also escorting the Empress and the sixth prince back to the south. Eunuch Chen's tragic experience on the stone bridge in Liangxiang proved that Ning Ke had a heart of stone and was cold-blooded and heartless. He would not be restricted by the red tape of the imperial court. Therefore, when they saw him walking over, the elders who were crying and persuading the Empress were shocked and even stopped crying. The leader of the group was Wei Jiechen. He was the oldest and had the most experience. Last year, he was invited by His Majesty 3 times to return to Chang'an and to take over the position left by Chancellor Jin after he passed away. Old Chancellor Wei Jiechen stood up, looked at Ning Ke and scolded, "What are you going to do?" Ning Ke said, "Don't you know what I did in Liang village?" The old chancellor took out a piece of paper from his sleeve and carefully spread it out as if it was the most precious treasure. He held it up in front of him and solemnly said, "Look at what is written on it." That piece of paper had already turned yellow. It was unknown how old it was. A line of words was written on the paper. The disciples of the Academy are strictly prohibited from interfering in court affairs. Ning Ke found that it was the headmaster's handwriting and could not help but be startled. The old chancellor shouted, kneel before the headmaster of the academy's ironclad rule. Ning Ke looked at him as if he was an idiot. The old chancellor saw that he didn't move and his expression became extremely ugly. He said, "Don't tell me you dare to disobey your master's order." Ning Ke snatched the yellow paper and tore it into 4 halves. He then crumpled them into a ball and threw them into the paddy field beside the state highway. Everyone was stunned. Even the empress, who was sitting in the carriage, was shocked speechless. The disciples of the academy are best at defying the orders of their masters. Ning Ke looked at the old chancellor and said. The old chancellor had never seen such an arrogant person. Trembling with anger, he pointed his finger at Qin Haodong's face and said sadly, "How can there be such a disrespectful person like you in the Tang Empire? Really angering this old man to death." I only tore the note that teacher Zhang casually wrote. That person in the palace even changed his father's posthumous edict. Why didn't I see old Chancellor die from anger? Or are you angry because you no longer have my ink brush in your hands? If you want it, I can bring you one from the academy in 2 days, or I can write one myself. My handwriting is better than my teacher's. Ning Ke said calmly without any mockery on his face. However, because of this, his words seemed even sharper. The old chancellor withdrew his finger and clutched his chest. He panted painfully and said intermittently, "You villain! Even if the headmaster is in heaven, he won't forgive you." Ning Ke shouted, "That old guy left us and went to heaven. Do you think he can still control me? If you have the ability, call him down from heaven. I will thank you for the rest of my life." "Enough," the Empress said in the carriage. "Don't make things difficult for the old man. Don't you see that he is uncomfortable?" Ning Ke said calmly, "Then hurry up and die from anger. Then he won't feel uncomfortable anymore." There was an uproar. The officials were furious. They stood up with their old bodies and supported the old chancellor who was on the verge of collapse. They scolded the Empress repeatedly. No one knew where they learned their temper from, but they would rather die than let the Empress carriage pass. Ning Ke's hand fell on the hilt of his knife. The Empress suddenly said, "I will rest at the post station for a day." Ning Ke understood what she meant and said, "Then I will go to Chang'an first." He turned over and mounted the horse, ready to leave. The imperial court could use all kinds of methods to stop the Empress from returning, but no one and no way could stop him. The old officials saw that the situation could not be reversed. They stood by the road and scolded him for being heartless and not seeing the big picture. Ning Ke stopped his horse and turned to look at the old officials. He said, "The world has not seen my coldness. Take care of yourself. You will slowly see it in the future." The West Hill Divine Palace Army had already arrived at the Verdant Canyon. Master Chi Mei had already arrived at the Western Army Commander Camp. The cavalry of the Golden Palace continued to move south. The eastern border of the Tang Empire was about to become a scorched land. It was a time of crisis. Ning Ke carried a padao on his back and a wooden box. He walked into Chang'an under the setting sun. Note: the imperial study was the place Ning Ke was most familiar with in the palace. He looked at the paperweight on the table and found that there was a crack on it. He put the wooden box on the table and patted it. He said, "Your Majesty, we are back." In this room, he saw His Majesty write, "The flower blooms on the shore," so he wrote, "The fish jumps over the sea." From that moment on, he had a very close relationship with the palace. Chang'an was the god-stunning array. This array was given to him by Master Yen Sei, but it was actually His Majesty's intention. It was related to the safety of the country, so the final decision should be made by the Emperor. In other words, His Majesty had entrusted Chang'an and the Tang Empire to him a long time ago. Ning Ke had been growing over the years, but he was still far from being able to take on such a heavy responsibility. He thought that he had a lot of time, but he did not expect the headmaster to leave first and His Majesty to leave so suddenly. Therefore, this heavy responsibility fell on his shoulders in advance. The door of the imperial study was pushed open. Liu walked in, looking a little haggard. She looked at the wooden box on the table and slowly knelt down. Ning Ke stood at the side and looked at her quietly. After a long time, Liu stood up. Her eyes were slightly red, and she looked even more haggard and tired. Ning Ke said, "If His Majesty is still alive, he must be very disappointed with you." Liu smiled. Her smile was very sad. She said, "What about you? Are you also very disappointed?" Note: this is Gulong. It seems that there is such a scene in every book of mine. The male protagonist always carries a box into a certain city. Is that the murderous aura of a battle of life and death? And then, there is more today. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 730. It was quiet in the imperial study. Ning Ke was silent for a long time and then said slowly, "Disappointment is inevitable, but it is not hopeless yet." Liu smiled. Compared with her previous pitiful smile, this smile was more self-deprecating. She said, "This is really beyond my expectations. I thought you had completely given up on me. From Wuzhou to Chang'an, including when I entered Chang'an, you did not use the army." Ning Ke looked at the red walls of the palace and said, "I appreciate this. Or perhaps you have no army to use now, and I have misunderstood you." Liu said, "No matter how difficult the situation is, when it comes to life and death, even if I have to squeeze, I can squeeze out some troop. You know my temperament, I will always leave some cards for the last." Ning Ke said, "In fact, I really hope that you can use those cards." Liu asked, "Why?" Ning Ke said, "In that case I can wash away those cards of yours, and I can kill you the first time I see you without any psychological barriers." Liu said softly, "Why do you want to kill me the first time we meet? Because I tampered with Father's edict? Or is it because you found out that I am not the kind of person you imagined and are disappointed, so you are angry? Although you quietly listened to my fairy tale for a whole night by the bonfire, I have never regarded you as a princess in a fairy tale. How could a woman who married into the wilderness and returned safely be a simple person? I am not disappointed in this aspect, so I will not be angry because of this." Ning Ke said, "As for tampering with the edict, it may seem rebellious in the eyes of others, but I really don't care. My coldness and reality are far beyond what you and the world can imagine. If you can really make the Tang Empire flourish after you help Li Huiyuan seize the throne, and the people live happily, then maybe I will support you. But the reality is not like that." Listening to his words, Liu's eyes gradually brightened. She looked at him and said seriously, "You promised before that in this matter you will support me." Ning Ke said, "Wrong, I promised you that I would not support the Empress." Liu said, "Then what are you doing now? Why did you bring that woman and her son back to Chang'an? What do you want to fight for her?" Ning Ke said, "You are wrong again. I support His Majesty's last wish." Liu looked a little lonely. After a moment, a determined expression returned to her face. She said, "This is the Li family's business after all. It's not up to you and the Academy to interfere." Ning Ke said, "This is the third time you have said something wrong today. First of all, the Tang Empire does not belong to the Li family. It belongs to the Tangs. Secondly, the headmaster of the Academy founded the Tang Empire 1,000 years ago. Even if it belongs to someone now, it should belong to the Academy." Liu frowned slightly. "For thousands of years, Chang'an has never been breached. If it was breached, it would be the people in the city who let it be. I can understand that you and Li Huiyuan want the throne, but you chose the wrong time and the way you chose was terrible. As I said before, this is what disappoints me the most." Ning Ke said. Liu stared into his eyes and said with a trembling voice, "In this situation, who do you think can do better than me? You or that woman?" "I know what you mean. In your opinion, The Tang Empire has no chance of winning if the whole world fights against the Tang Empire. Ning Ke said, but it is normal that we are not as smart as the enemy and not as powerful as the whole world. But some mistakes should not be made. For example, Su Shi should not have died. Many soldiers should not have died. Thinking of the tragic scenes he had seen on his way back to the south and the silent city of Wei, he was silent for a moment and then continued, since I killed people in the woodshed when I was a child, I became selfish and cold. I did not care about anyone except Sang Sang. It was not until I went to the city of Wei that I changed. Then I entered the academy. Some changes have been quietly happening in my heart, but I did not notice it. The year before last, on my way to the Lank Temple, I saw the wilderness in the south of the Tang Empire. The scenery there was beautiful and the people there were good. The Tang Empire is really a good place. I like it and I do not want it to be hurt. But now, it's severely injured and it's even dying. Ning Ke looked at her and said, I believe that many stupid mistakes are not made by you, but by him. So I want to know how he is going to bear the responsibility. Liu clenched her fists and trembled slightly. She did not speak. Ning Ke looked into her eyes and asked again, Where is the prince? Liu said in a hoarse voice, His Majesty is resting. The two of them addressed Li Huiyuan differently, which meant that they had different attitudes. The imperial study fell into silence again. Ning Ke suddenly said, Let him abdicate first. We will talk about other things later. Liu shook her head and said, I cannot let His Majesty abdicate, because that means death. Ning Ke said, Now many people know who His Majesty passed the throne to. You and your brother cannot continue to lie. Liu said coldly, You do not have a posthumous edict, and the edict from the West Hill Divine Palace clearly states that the woman is a remnant of the devil's doctrine. How many people in the imperial court and the military will support her? Ning Ke said, You know me. I do not care how many people support me. I only care how many people oppose me. Then you will kill all those who oppose you? You do not care that the entire Tang Empire will fall into division because of your actions, and no longer have the power to resist foreign enemies. Liu sneered and said, You said that you do not despair because I did not use the army to deal with you. Then you should know why I did not do so. I am my father's daughter. No matter how much I want to kill that woman, I do not want the Tang Empire to fall into internal strife in the current situation. What about you? Ning Ke was silent. Liu looked into his eyes and said in a pleading tone, The Tang Empire cannot be divided now. There cannot be internal strife. Otherwise, no one can bear the terrible consequences. The only way now is for you to stand up and support me and my brother. As long as the Tang Empire can be reunited, with the support of the Academy, maybe we can really turn the tide. Ning Ke frowned slightly and said, Have you ever thought about it? You and your brother can lead the ministers and the army loyal to you to pledge loyalty to the Empress and the Sixth Prince? Then what should we do in the future? That woman will definitely kill us. And don't forget, she is from the devil's doctrine. Even if I speak up, many ministers and generals will not support her. Liu said, I know you are not reconciled and you are very angry. But I have severely punished His Majesty. Tomorrow, the imperial court will issue an edict of self-condemnation. Severely punished? How many slaps? Ning Ke looked at her and said sarcastically. Liu was greatly stimulated by his expression and cried, I only have this brother. I raised him with one hand. How can I watch him die? I let you into Chang, and then took the risk to let you speak to the palace just to beg you to let him go. Can't I do that too? Ning Ke looked at the tears on her face and suddenly remembered the past many years ago. If not for Liu, he would have returned to Chang'an, but he might not have been able to enter the academy. Without her help, it would not have been so easy to get the stamped document from the ministry. From a certain point of view, this beautiful woman in front of him changed his and Song Song's lives. Liu said with tears in her eyes, think about Sang Sang. She was raised by you. No matter how big a mistake she made, do you have the heart to let her be hurt? I am the same as her sister. So you have always loved Sang Sang? Ning Ke said thoughtfully. The long night passed and morning came. The chaos in Chang'an had gradually calmed down. The smell of incense and candles wafted through the morning fog, and many ministers could be seen. Today was not the day of the grand court meeting, but it was held. Everyone knew why. It was because the Empress and the sixth prince had returned and were outside Chang'an. Some ministers even knew that Mr. 13 of the Academy, Ning Ke, was in the palace and had a long talk with Her Highness the Princess. As for the content of the talk, it was obvious. At this time, the Tang Empire was facing a very serious situation. In contrast, the authenticity of the edict and the ownership of the throne were really not important. Just as Li Yu had predicted, from the Prime Minister to the ordinary people in Chang'an, everyone only hoped that the two sides could reach an agreement as soon as possible and not let the Tang Empire fall into civil strife. After confirming that Ning Ke and Her Highness the Princess had talked for a long night, the officials finally calmed down a little. There was no bloodshed in the palace, which meant that at least this matter could be discussed. Even those officials of the Empress's faction who had survived the chaos caused by He Mingqi stood straighter than usual and looked more solemn. However, they still kept their silence rationally. They believed that even if the Academy could not let the sixth prince ascend the throne, they could at least fight for enough compensation for the Empress and the sixth prince. They could also explain what had happened that day. The Grand Court meeting officially began. After confirming that his royal sister had convinced Ning Ke, Li Huiyuan walked out of the heavily guarded side hall and sat on the cold imperial chair. His face was a little pale. Behind the imperial chair was a bead curtain. Li Yu sat quietly behind the curtain. The ministers in the hall looked between the bead curtain and the imperial chair. Ning Ke, who was wearing a black academy robe, stood on the golden brick floor in silence. A eunuch opened the court meeting. The emperor began to read out his own edict. Then, to everyone's surprise, the emperor walked down from the imperial chair and knelt to the ministers in the hall, kowtowing to them. The ministers were shocked and speechless. They hurriedly knelt back. The emperor kowtowed to the people outside the hall and apologized to the Tang army and people. Finally, he knelt to Ning Ke, who was beside the imperial chair, and asked for the Academy's forgiveness. For thousands of years, no Tang emperor had ever knelt and apologized in the court meeting. Not to mention the ministers who were loyal to Li Yu and her brother were moved to tears. Even the officials of the Empress's faction felt the emperor's sincerity and looked a little better. The bead curtain made a sound and Li Yu walked out from behind it. She bowed to the officials in the court and said, "I only have this one brother. As his elder sister, I will bear the responsibility for the mistakes he has committed. When the war is over, I will give the Tang army and people an explanation. His Majesty will make the sixth prince the emperor's younger brother. Mr. 13 will go out of the city and report to the Empress Dowager later." In the current situation, in order to avoid the division of the Tang Empire and prevent the ministers, soldiers, and people in the court from choosing between the two factions, this was undoubtedly the most appropriate arrangement. The hall resounded with the praises of the ministers, and the content of their speech was nothing more than this. At this moment, a voice rang out. Thus, the entire hall became extremely quiet. Because the person who spoke was Ning Quebec, you said you only have one brother. He looked at Li Yu and said, "Actually, you are wrong." Li Yu was a little confused. She did not know why he suddenly said this. "You have two brothers," Ning Ke said. Then he pulled out the padao behind him and slashed at Li Huiyuan. With a crisp sound, Li Huiyuan's head was separated from his body. Fresh blood spurted out from the wound, reaching the ceiling of the hall before falling down powerlessly. The golden brick floor of the hall was covered with blood. Ning Ke looked at Li Yu and said, "Now, you only have one brother." There was dead silence in the hall. No one could believe what they were seeing. After a long time, a minister let out a heart-wrenching cry. Several old ministers fainted directly. 1,000 years after the founding of the Tang Empire, Li Huiyuan was the emperor who reigned for the shortest time. He was also the only emperor who was killed in the palace. Of course, only Ning Ke knew that Emperor Taizu was also killed by the headmaster in the palace. His Majesty was beheaded at the Grand Court meeting. This bloody scene, this shocking and indescribable truth, caused everyone to be dumbfounded. Li Yu's face was pale and bloodless. She looked at her brother who was lying in a pool of blood and fell down. Ning Ke took out a white handkerchief from somewhere and wiped the blood on the padao. Then he looked at the ministers who were still in a state of extreme shock and said, "Just now, I heard a lot of things from you, such as choice and unity. You are very worried, so I will help you solve your worries. His Majesty is now dead, so the former emperor only has one son left. The throne can only be inherited by him, unless His Highness is also interested in the throne." Ning Ke looked at Prince Li Peiyan, who was standing at the head of the line of nobles. Li Peiyan's face was extremely pale, and he did not hear what Ning Ke said. "You are afraid of division, afraid of civil strife, afraid of making a choice that will make the current situation more serious. Then now you don't have to make a choice, nor does the entire Tang Empire." Ning Ke put the padao back into the sheath and looked at the ministers in the hall. Finally, he said, "There is no need to choose. This is what I think the Tang Empire needs most now, and I will work with all of you. Not today, but there is a separate chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 731. There was dead silence in the hall. No one answered Ning Ke's words. It didn't mean that his words were powerless. In fact, his words were like countless muffled thunders exploding in the minds of the ministers, leaving everyone in a state of confusion. A minister stepped out of the line and pointed at him with a trembling finger, wanting to scold him for his cold-blooded and shameless behavior. Ning Ke looked at the man quietly, without any emotion on his face. The minister's finger finally drooped down powerlessly. His lips kept trembling with anger, but he still didn't say a word. Since the tampering of the edict was exposed, the Tang court had been divided into two factions. The empire was about to be destroyed, so the division and hostility were forcibly suppressed. Many ministers used the overall situation to persuade themselves to ignore the edict for the time being, to avoid the Tang Empire officially falling into the mire of civil war. However, who would have thought that when Ning Ke entered the palace and talked with Her Highness for a long night, just when everyone thought the situation was under control, he killed His Majesty. Extreme fear and anger, and then these experienced ministers calmed down at an unimaginable speed. They were shocked to find that, as Ning Ke said, this was actually the best result. His Majesty was killed, and the bloodline of the former emperor was only left with the sixth prince. What other choice did the civil and military officials have except to support him to ascend the throne? These officials, the soldiers fighting in the front line, and the people who would eventually know that the edict was tampered with would no longer have to choose sides, and the Tang Empire would no longer be divided. Not having to choose was the best choice. In fact, everyone knew this truth, but not everyone could make this decision for the Tang Empire. Only Ning Ke could do it because only he dared to do it. Tampering with the former emperor's edict was treason, and anyone could be punished. Even the new emperor and Her Highness couldn't escape the judgment of the law of the Tang Empire. However, such a thing really happened in reality. Who dared to punish them at will? Only Ning Ke didn't give any chance for Li Huiyuan to explain or beg. He didn't give anyone time to think before he chopped down. It was to punish for disobedience. This simple movement showed his extremely calm and even cold way of thinking. It represented the Academy's extreme disregard for the imperial power of the Tang Empire, which made people shudder. What else could the ministers and generals of the Tang Empire do now? Ning Kei's seemingly rebellious behavior could be found in the law of the Tang Empire. Who dared to accuse him of assassinating the emperor? The most critical question was, even if someone thought so, in the current situation, who would dare to anger the academy, the last mountain of the Tang Empire? The officials looked at Ning Kei beside the throne and the corpse of His Majesty in the pool of blood. The expressions on their faces were extremely complicated, including anger, sadness, confusion, vigilance, and fear. Still, no one responded to Ning Kei's words. The deathly silence persisted, because their emotions were too agitated, and because they found it very difficult to accept that the great Tang had been suppressed by a cold-blooded and tyrannical blade. The academy was not allowed to meddle in politics. This was the iron rule left by the headmaster of the academy. So what was happening now? At this moment, the Empress walked into the hall with the sixth prince in hand. The officials in the hall were shocked again. They all knew that the Empress and the sixth prince were stopped outside Chang, and by the princess. When did she enter the city and the palace? Why didn't I hear anything? The Empress did not dress up. She still wore a plain dress and looked calm. She had been the Empress here for nearly 20 years. How could Chang unstop her? How could she not enter the palace? The sixth prince was also dressed in plain clothes, but there was a bright yellow belt around his waist. He followed his mother and looked at the bloody scene deep in the hall. His little face became abnormally pale. He felt that his legs were a little weak and his hands began to tremble. However, he did not dare to slow down or show any signs of retreat as he was held tightly by the Empress. The Empress continued to walk into the hall with the sixth prince, towards the throne. The officials in the hall only reacted now. The officials who had always been loyal to the Empress knelt down as fast as they could. They were so excited that their faces were red. The officials under Li Yu's faction gradually knelt down as well, but their expressions were still a little angry. The Empress led the sixth prince around the pool of blood in front of the throne and the body that was separated from the head. Ning Kei moved slightly to the side and made way for them. The Empress glanced at Li Yu. At this time, Li Yu was extremely sad and angry. She was distracted and did not respond at all. The Empress carried the sixth prince to the high throne and sat him down. Then she looked at the officials in the hall and said calmly, "What are you still doing? Is the Tang Empire now celebrating peace and prosperity? Military Ministry, submit the latest battle report first." Dozens of guards were vigilantly watching the surroundings for any movement. The mansion behind them was quiet and not a sound could be heard. It was completely different from the lively atmosphere in the past when Princess Li Yu was recruiting famous scholars and virtuous officials. The most loyal grassland guards around Li Yu had been in the Yulin Royal Guards for many years. When they heard that there was a change in the palace, they tried to attack the palace but were suppressed by the Yulin Royal Guards. Many of them died in the battle. Peng Yutao, the deputy commander who did not leave Chang, and with the valiant cavalry battalion, was subdued and sent to the prison of the military ministry before he could do anything. These were all people Ning Kei knew. Many years ago, on the journey from the city of Wei to Chang'an, he had gone through life and death with those grassland men and Peng Yutao. However, after so many years, after hearing this news, he only fell silent for a moment and did not think about it anymore. All the metal objects and sharp objects in the bedroom, even the bronze mirror, had been moved out. Countless soft bedding had been spread everywhere. Even if one wanted to smash into the wall and die, it would be very difficult. In less than half a day, Li Yu's face became extremely thin and pale. She looked very weak and could fall at any time. Her clear eyes seemed to be covered with a layer of frost. There was no luster and a piercing coldness in them. She looked at Ning Kei and said in a trembling voice, "I didn't expect you to lie to me. If you are talking about the last conversation in the Imperial study, I didn't lie to you. At that time I just kept silent. You said that no matter what Sang Sang did, I could not bear to hurt her. You were right. I can understand that you can't bear to hurt Li Huiyuan. But understanding and agreeing are two different things. Ning Ke looked at her and said, "Your love and sadness for him have nothing to do with me. Just like how I love Sang Sang, it will not be recognized by the world. Moreover, I don't like your brother." Liu stared at him and said with hatred, "But have you ever thought that you killed my father's son? Would my father really agree to you doing this? Then have you ever thought about why no one has ever been able to kill a member of the Li royal family in the palace for thousands of years? Yes, it is because the god-stunning array has always been protecting the palace. Just now in the main hall, when I chopped down with my knife, the beasts on the eaves of several halls in the palace all reacted. But their aura was forced to restrain after they recognized me." Ning Ke looked at her and said calmly, "Why? Because His Majesty gave me the god-stunning array in Chang'an, which means he gave the lives of all the Li family members to me for me to deal with." Liu's body trembled slightly and her face became paler. "I see. So father would rather believe in the academy than us children. In his eyes, only the academy is the true protector of the Tang Empire." She looked at Ning Ke and said sarcastically, "The Tang Empire is about to be destroyed, but the academy does not move and hides in the mountains like a timid mouse. I wonder if father regrets his choice?" The expression on Ning Ke's face did not change at all. He said, "This is where you are not as good as the Empress. She will never doubt His Majesty's decision. Moreover, she has personally experienced the headmaster and the academy. Therefore, even if she and I have a deep grudge, she chose to believe me without any hesitation or reservation. Only those whose eyes are covered by leaves will not be able to see the back of the mountain of the academy. Only then will they really think that the academy will choose to hide out of fear. Even though I do not know the specific situation, I can tell you now that my senior brothers and sisters are definitely preparing to fight for the Tang Empire and the academy." Liu lowered her head and did not speak. She did not know if she would believe Ning Ke's words. Ning Ke did not care about this. He looked at her and continued, "My purpose of returning to Chang'an is naturally to fight. I want to calm the chaos in Chang'an as soon as possible and ensure that there is no problem with the god-stunning array. Then I will get the array I pestle. As long as I can do this, no matter how powerful the West Hill Divine Palace is, they will not be able to attack." He talked about his plan very seriously, as if he was explaining it. However, there was no need to explain it to Liu at this time, so it seemed a little strange. "I said all this to tell you that the Tang Empire will not be destroyed." Ning Ke looked into her eyes and saw the unlucky grayness in them. He continued to try to dispel her will to die. He said coldly, "If you want to take revenge on me or the academy, you need to live first." Liu's eyes finally had some luster. At this time, she had already guessed Ning Ke's intention and asked, "Why do you want me to live? If you are alive, the ministers and troops loyal to you and Li Huiyuan will be more stable. The military orders and political affairs of the imperial court can be carried out more efficiently. At this critical moment, I will not let go of any favorable factors. So I need you to be alive and continue to contribute your strength to the Tang Empire." Ning Ke said. Liu stared into his eyes and said coldly, "You can put it in another way." Ning Ke said, "The Tang Empire needs you to live now? I don't think this kind of verbal embellishment has any meaning at this time. Your Highness is smart. It is good that you understand what I mean." Liu's body trembled slightly, as if she was looking at a complete stranger. She said, "You are too cold." Ning Ke said, "Outside Chang'an, in front of the old people you sent, I said that you have no idea what I am like when I am cold. But as long as you are alive, you will have the chance to see it. A new day has begun. I will continue to work hard. You can vote for the monthly vote that you could not vote yesterday. Bow 80 degrees to express my deep gratitude. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 732. Many years later, in the world's records of that magnificent war, the Tang Empire's first counterattack began when Ning Ke escorted the Empress and the sixth prince back to Chang'an and killed Li Huiyuan. But in fact, the Tang Empire's first counterattack did not come from Ning Ke, nor from the northern battlefront army who fought against the Golden Palace. It was not even from Cao Shaoshu, who led the valiant cavalry battalion out of Chang'an to face tens of thousands of invaders from the eastern border. It was not from the navy who turned the Qinghe River red and vowed not to surrender. It came from a farmer. There was a village in the fertile fields in the south of the Tang Empire. There was a stream next to the village, and there was a stone mill by the stream. Opposite the mill was a raised meadow with many grape trellises. The grapes on the trellises had been picked long ago, and only a few undeveloped grapes were left in the same place. They were covered with autumn frost and dust, and looked very inconspicuous. It was a beautiful village, but it was not much different from the villages in the Tang Empire. It looked as inconspicuous as the bunches of grapes hanging under the grape trellises on the grassy slope. There was a farmer named Yang Erxi in the village. Although he insisted that he was a painter, in the eyes of the villagers, this plump guy who could use a pitchfork and feed the pigs was, of course, a farmer, and the best kind. Yang Erxi could not refuse this kind of praise, so he could only silently accept it. Like many rural men in the Tang Empire, Yang Erxi had been in the army. He fought with the Yans at the frontier fortress and killed the grassland cavalry. Even his painting skills were learned in the frontier army. In the years after he retired from the army, he married and had children. He earned money to support his family and lived a peaceful and happy life. Except for some common quarrels in every family, there was nothing new and exciting in his life. The tension and ups and downs of his life were all left in the frontier fortress many years ago. Except for meeting a big black horse who liked to eat big grain porridge, there was nothing new and exciting in his life. Sometimes Yang Erxi missed those days in the frontier fortress. One day, he was painting the wall of the public school with a bucket of tree paint. Suddenly, a yamen runner walked into the public school, pasted a piece of white paper on the wall, and then left in a hurry. Yang Erxi made a fuss for 2 years, but in the end, the yamen still refused to increase the paint fee. He had been beaten up by his old father and harassed by his daughter for a long time, so he had no choice but to agree to paint the public school. He was already in a bad mood, and now he was even more annoyed. He thought to himself, "Can't these guys see that I'm painting? How can I paint with such a big piece of white paper?" Of course, he would not admit that what annoyed him the most was that he could not read the words on that piece of paper. The literacy rate of the Tangs was extremely high, but he had been mischievous since he was a child. This did not change even after he joined the army. He would rather be beaten than attend literacy classes, so now he was one of the few illiterates in the village. He was often teased by the children in the neighborhood, which became his biggest regret. Fortunately, after a while, the bell rang in the public school. The people in the village heard the bell and came to listen to the law teacher explain what the court had announced. The law teacher from the public school had not come out yet, but the literate commoners had already understood the contents of the white paper. This was because what was written on it was not a new law, but a battle report. Everyone was silent, and their faces became very ugly. Yang Erxi still did not know what was written on it. Looking at everyone's expression, he became more and more anxious. He grabbed a child who wanted to go home to inform his parents, waved his fist, and finally got the answer. The northeast border military was ambushed in the Yen Kingdom and was defeated. There was a lot more in the imperial court's document, especially for the people in the counties and villages in the eastern border. They were requested to evacuate as quickly as possible, and the prefectural armies of each province were to organize defenses on the spot, and men with military experience were to be recruited. No one paid attention to these contents, because they were still a long way from the Yen Kingdom, and those words were not for them to hear. People were just shocked and angry at the failure of the empire, and there was a lot of discussion. Some people worriedly asked if the troops of the Yen kingdom would attack here, and they were immediately ridiculed. No one believed them at all. Everyone firmly believed that as long as the imperial court sent the army, the eastern border would definitely be fine. Young Urxi had been very silent. After the crowd dispersed, he pulled the law teacher from the public school and seriously asked him about the contents of the imperial court's document. He was not in the mood to paint again, and the county government did not pay him much. When he returned home, he drank wine with half a pot of pig's trotters and a basket of dipped vegetables, and the more he drank, the more depressed he became. His wife squatted outside the doorsill, scooping out the grape skins and dregs from the wooden barrel, preparing to make wine. Suddenly, she found that she had not heard her husband speak for a long time and asked, "What's wrong?" Young Urxi said, "Nothing." His wife said, "You should eat some food. It's not good to drink on an empty stomach." Young Urxi grunted and continued to drink. The more he drank, the quieter he became, but his eyes became brighter. Suddenly, he said to his wife, "I'm going on a long trip." His wife raised her head and asked in confusion, "What's wrong?" Something happened in the east. Young Urxi told her the contents of the imperial court's document and said, "I want to go and have a look." His wife was stunned for a while, and then she laughed, the grape juice in her hand flying everywhere, and mocked, "Something happened in the east. East of your pigsty or the grape trellis. You speak as if the Tang Empire is your home. Are you the emperor or the empress? You're just a farmer." Young Urxi said angrily, "I'm a painter, not a farmer." His wife did not take his words seriously, thinking that he was drunk. She lowered her head and continued to work, muttering, "Every time I drink, I like to talk nonsense." Young Urxi was silent for a moment, and then he said in a low voice, "I'm not drunk. It's written at the back of the imperial court's document that men who have military experience, as long as they are under 40 years old, will be conscripted." Only then did his wife realize that the man was not drunk. She took her hands out of the wooden barrel, wiped them on her clothes, and said nervously, "The imperial court's conscription order is issued to the eastern border. What does it have to do with us? We are close to Chang'an, and the eastern border is far away. I'm afraid the imperial court's document will take a few days to arrive. Maybe by then, the Yans and those damn barbarians will have already attacked. What's the use of it then? Even if the imperial court wants to conscript, they have to wait for the county government to organize it. Nothing has happened yet." Young Urxi said in a low voice, "But what's the use of going alone?" His wife said in a trembling voice, "But what's the use of you going alone?" Young Urxi said, "Even if the eastern border is invaded, the imperial court will definitely set up a wartime yamen there. When I get there, I will naturally go to them." The more his wife listened, the more uneasy she became. She screamed to the next room, "Father, come quickly." Young Urxi slammed the table, and the vegetables and leftover pig trotters all fell to the ground. He said angrily, "What are you shouting for? Why is your voice not so loud when I ask you to call me over for dinner?" The courtyard door was pushed open, and a hunchbacked old man came in. Young Urxi stood up and said, "Father, have you eaten?" The old man looked at the mess on the ground, smacked his lips, and said, "No." Young Urxi said, "Then let your daughter-in-law chop the leg." His wife looked at her father-in-law with tears in her eyes. She thought to herself, "I have always been short of your father's food. Last time, I didn't ask you to stew the pork leg. You can't be angry because of this. If you can keep this drunk guy at home, let alone the pork leg, I will chop my own leg to show my filial respect to you." The old man did not speak for a long time. Young Urxi was a little nervous. "You are so noisy, and there is only a wall between us. How can I not hear you?" the old man said. Young Urxi was very strong and tall, but at this time, he honestly lowered his head, just like when he made a mistake when he was a child. He mumbled, "I am a retired soldier from the border army. If I don't go now, what's the matter? before he finished speaking, the old man glared at him and shouted sternly, "What's so great about being a soldier? Your father, I was also a soldier. I even became a colonel. What are you showing off here?" Hearing this, his wife stopped crying and looked expectantly at her father-in-law. The old man was silent again for a moment and suddenly said, "If you want to go, then go. If I am not 60 now, but 40, I will go with you." Young Erxie took out a well-maintained boxwood bow from the compartment. Then he put the sharp and reflective pitchfork on his shoulder. His wife tied a heavy leg of cured pork to the other end of the pitchfork and asked, "Do you want to tie a pot of wine?" Wives in the Tang Empire usually had this kind of temperament. Seeing that they could not change it, they silently accepted it and then began to seriously take care of their men. Young Erxie said, "We are going to war. Drinking is against military discipline." His wife put down the newly brewed wine, thinking that he was not a proper soldier, so what military discipline was there? At this time, the two children ran home. The younger brother was panting and his face was red. He wanted to say something, but he could not. The older sister looked at young Erxie and said angrily, "Father, the public school is not finished painting, and the teacher is very unhappy. Do you want us to be unable to study and be like you?" If it was a normal day, young Erxie would definitely lose his temper when he heard his daughter talk like this, and then carry the bucket of paint to the public school to finish the rest of the work. But today, he just smiled. "Tell the teacher that I will finish painting when I come back." Young Erxie looked at his father and said, "Father, I am leaving." The old man nodded and said, "Be careful on the road." Young Erxie kissed his wife on the cheek. It was a very loud kiss. The two children had probably seen this kind of scene many times. They were not surprised, but curious about something else. The son opened his eyes wide and asked, "Father, where are you going?" Young Erxie said, "To the east." The daughter asked, "Father, what are you going to do?" Young Erxie said, "To war." The daughter said excitedly, "Father, you must win the war." "Of course I will win." Young Erxie laughed, carried the bow and arrows, and carried the pitchfork and went out the door. I really like this chapter. When I was writing, I always felt a very clear child's voice asking me what I am going to do, and a deep male voice saying, "I am going to war." This feeling is really good. I was a little happy writing, so I chatted a little. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 733. Under the leadership of Prince Longqing, the cavalry of the left King's palace and the allied forces of Yen, Song, and Qi broke through the Tang territory. In the beginning, there was no resistance. The northeast border military of the Tang Empire was destroyed. Although many of the Tang soldiers were still alive, they were struggling to survive under the pursuit of the Yen army. Even if they escaped back to the Tang territory, they would not be able to fight. The allied forces that invaded the Tang territory, especially the grassland cavalry from the wilderness, did whatever they wanted in the eastern territory of the Tang Empire. They burned, killed, looted, and committed all kinds of crimes. The grassland cavalry's arms were full of gold and silver. They looked excited and urged their horses to gallop back and forth on the official road. Longqing looked at the scene at the foot of the hill and frowned slightly. He said coldly, "Consolidate the military discipline. Don't waste time in these remote places. We have to reach Chang and as soon as possible." The subordinate took the order and left. But some generals had a different view. The undefeated reputation of the Tang Empire for 1,000 years had left an indelible fear in the hearts of these generals. Although the war was going well, they had never expected to break through Chang and city, including the grassland cavalry. They thought that they should retreat after plundering in the Tang territory to prevent the Tang's counterattack and revenge. The Tang Empire today is not the Tang Empire of the past. The siblings in Chang and keep making mistakes. Of course, even if they did not make any mistakes, they would not persist. Because heaven wants to destroy the Tang Empire. Long Qing said. Now the Tang Empire is surrounded by enemies. We have no Tang army in front of us. Chang'an is defenseless. This is the opportunity given by Haotian. If we don't seize it, we will be punished by heaven. A general said, even if we attack Chang'an, it will be meaningless. Everyone knows that Chang'an cannot be broken through. What should we do then? There is no city that cannot be broken through in this world. Long Qing did not explain further. In today's world, only a few people, including him, knew the real plan of the West Hill Divine Palace. The Golden Palace's invasion of the South and the world's war against the Tang Empire were just a cover-up or a means to exhaust the Tang army. The West Hill Divine Palace wanted Chang'an to be defenseless. Everything was for the Array-I Pestle. The West Hill Divine Palace was confident that they could get the Array-I Pestle. The soldiers and civilians of the Tang Empire all thought that Chang'an city could not be breached, so they sent their troops to different places. The West Hill Divine Palace obtained the Array-I Pestle and broke the god-stunning array. Chang'an city was about to face a massacre. Long Qing gently lifted the reins and walked down the hill. The ears of wheat hung heavily in the farmland. The golden ocean danced in the autumn wind. The scenery was very beautiful. The farmhouses by the fields had already been set ablaze, the black smoke rising and the screams of the Tang could faintly be heard. Long Qing recalled the day he left Chang'an, and after failing to enter the second floor of the academy many years ago. That day, he saw the beautiful rural scenery of the Tang Empire, the farmhouses painted in various colors, and the peaceful and happy lives of the Tang people. At that time, he vowed that one day, he would return to the Tang Empire and burn everything. It was not out of pity for the Tangs that he ordered the generals to enforce discipline, but because it was necessary for the army to march. In fact, he thought that the scene of being burned and slaughtered was a truly beautiful sight. Long Qing's face, which was not covered by the silver mask, revealed a happy smile. Tens of thousands of coalition troops wreaked havoc in the eastern wilderness of the Tang Empire. No matter how strict the military discipline was, it was impossible to completely follow all orders, not to mention that most of them were undisciplined grassland cavalries. Prince Long Qing's military order was passed down. Most of the grassland cavalries obeyed and followed the military flag to Chang'an city in the west. However, there were still more than 1,000 cavalries left behind. These grassland cavalries believed that with their riding skills, it would not take too long to catch up with the main force in front of them. Therefore, they were not in a hurry to set off. Instead, they were in a hurry to loot everywhere. They had long known that the Central Plains was rich and the lives of the Tang Empire's people were even better. However, it was not until they entered the Tang Empire's territory that they realized how ridiculous their imagination of the Central Plains was when they stood in the wilderness. The wealth accumulated in an ordinary Tang village was actually more than that of a medium-sized tribe on the grassland. Those exquisite silk, gold and silver treasures made them reluctant to leave. Those fair and beautiful women of the Tang Empire made them salivate. Therefore, many of them decided to loot again before the war. Dozens of grassland cavalries from the left king's palace waved the machetes in their hands and rushed into a small village in the call with sharp whistles and laughter. This small village was far away from the official road and luckily avoided the main force of the coalition troops. The nearby refugees also took the small road to hide here. Now there were more than 100 people in the village. Most of these refugees were old, weak women and children. As for the men and their families, they had all died in the battle with the grassland cavalries when their village was destroyed. The grassland cavalries gathered all the people and began to search the houses for valuables. However, this village was a bit remote and relatively poor, so they did not gain much. The grassland cavalries were very dissatisfied and angrily scolded something. The old, weak women and children who were gathered in the middle of the village did not understand what these barbarians were scolding. They all lowered their heads in silence. Only an old woman held a little girl in her arms and stared at the grassland cavalries. The little girl was still young and did not know exactly what had happened. But she knew that her home was burned down by the bad guys in the tattered leather clothes. Her father was killed by these bad guys with a bad smell. So her eyes were full of hatred. A grassland cavalry was angry about the little harvest today. Suddenly he saw the girl's hateful eyes and suddenly became angry. He held the machete and walked toward the crowd. He raised the machete in his hand. Several old people in the crowd stood up and scolded angrily, trying to stop him. But the machete had fallen. The little girl was not hacked to death, because the machete fell on the ground and made a crisp sound. With an arrow lodged in his eye socket, the cavalryman fell stiffly to the ground. The arrow was a bit messy, not like the standard weapon of the Tang army. The grassland cavalries were shocked. They shouted in the barbarian language, and quickly got back on their horses. They took down the short wooden bows on their shoulders and looked at the forest behind the village with vigilance. Whoosh! The arrow whistled. An arrow flew out of the forest and hit the shoulder of a grassland cavalry. Blood spurted out. The grassland cavalries were not surprised. Instead, they were happy. They shouted and urged their horses to surround the forest. Through the characteristics of the arrow, they were sure that the archers in the forest were not regular soldiers of the Tang army. They were more likely to be hunters. A few days ago, many brothers of the tribes were killed by the Tang hunters. The hunters were at most in groups of 2 or 3 people. Once they showed up, how could they be a match for these elite cavalries? Young Erxi hid behind a tree, holding the boxwood bough in his hand tightly. His shoulder was against the trunk and his right foot was gently stepping on the ground. He looked a little nervous. Compared with the time when he left home, he was much thinner and darker. His face was messy and full of beard. There were several bloody cuts on his dry lip. He looked very embarrassed. The sound of hooves gradually came. The grassland cavalries came to surround the forest. He jumped out of the tree, pulled his bow and shot. The arrow left the string and hit the waist of a cavalryman. After confirming that there was only one archer hiding in the forest, 3 grassland cavalries held their short wooden bows and shot continuously. Young Erxi was forced to hide behind the tree and did not dare to poke his head out. The rest of the cavalries surrounded him from the side. From time to time, there was a sound of knocking on the trunk. The bark was splashed and the arrows brushed past his body. The grassland cavalries were very experienced in dealing with the Tang hunters. Young Erxi could not fight back at all. He could only watch the enemy rush out of the forest. Although he was in a desperate situation, he did not show any fear on his face except for a little shortness of breath. At this moment, there was a dense sound of breaking the air. A violent rain of arrows fell from the forest. More than 20 grassland cavalries in the front were suddenly shot like hedgehogs. They fell from their horses and died on the spot with blood all over their bodies. Then there was a loud sound of stepping on grass and rubbing trees. Countless people rushed out from the depths of the forest and killed the grassland cavalries like wolves and tigers. The grassland cavalries who were still alive shouted in shock and anger. Their faces showed fear and they pulled the border rope desperately, trying to turn their horses around and escape. If one could understand the language of the barbarians, he would know that the word shouted by the grassland cavalries was ambush. They thought they were ambushed by the Tang army. More than 100 people rushed out of the forest. Some wore ordinary cotton-padded clothes and some wore silk shirts. Most of them were dressed like farmers. None of them wore the uniform of the Tang army. These people were a little older and held a variety of weapons in their hands. For example, Yang Erxi held a pitchfork, some held a hammer, and most of them held a straight knife. The sharp straight knife was the weapon of the Tang army. Were these people the Tang army or not? They were not the Tang army. They used to be the Tang army. They had retired from the army. Now they were businessmen, bodyguards, and farmers. But when the Tang Empire needed them, they were the Tang army. Yang Erxi smashed a grassland cavalryman from his horse to the ground. Then he strode forward and turned over his hands. The heavy pitchfork drew an arc in the air and fiercely stabbed into the cavalryman's chest. Then he walked forward and stepped on the grassland cavalryman's body with his right foot. Then he pulled out his hands. With a poof, several bloody holes appeared on the cavalryman's chest. This whole set of movements was very smooth and skillful. He must have repeated it many times. Holding the pitchfork, he ran diagonally to a grassland cavalryman who was surrounded by his companions. He was a little annoyed and muttered in his heart that he had to get a knife today. "Get out of the way. Let me do it," he shouted. The grassland cavalryman was already bloody and unconscious. He leaned against a tree and waved the scimitar in his hand purely out of instinct. He had no ability to resist. The Tang soldiers surrounding the cavalryman heard young Erxie's anxious shout and understood what he meant. They tacitly made way for him and left the enemy to him. Young Erxie ran to the grassland cavalryman who was dying. He spat into his palm and smashed the pitchfork on him, as if he was doing farm work at home. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 734. The ambush on the grassland cavalries was a complete victory. When cleaning the battlefield, young Erxie, who killed 3 enemies and wounded 2, gained the right to choose the spoils from the dead enemies. The wealth plundered by these cavalries was naturally handed over to the imperial court. The so-called spoils were nothing more than armor and weapons. But the leather armor used by the grassland cavalries was like a tattered fig leaf in the eyes of the former regular Tang army. No one was interested in it, so they could only target those sabers and arrows. Young Erxie wanted to change his saber. The pitchfork was sharpened and could be used to kill people. After many battles, he was very comfortable with it. But after all, it was a farming tool used for weeding, so it was always a little inconvenient. Before the Tang soldiers left the barracks, they could get the honor of bringing their weapons home by the number of years they had served in the army and their daily achievements. No one would be willing to leave the weapons that had accompanied them for many years. Most people would choose to exchange, and finally it became a tradition of the Tang army. Young Erxie was famous for his archery in the army, so he chose to take the boxwood bow back to his hometown and leave the saber in the army. Now he found that his companions all took the saber home from the barracks, and he felt a little uncomfortable. So he wanted to change his saber. The 2 grassland cavalrymen who were shot dead at the beginning had lost their sabers. That was why he asked his companion to leave the last one to him. Young Erxie thanked his considerate companions, picked up the scimitar from the bodies of the grassland cavalries, and twirled it. Although he was still not used to it, he felt it was much better than the pitchfork. With a sharp and good saber, the pitchfork looked a little clumsy and ugly. But after thinking for a long time, he still couldn't bear to throw it away, so he carried the pitchfork on his shoulder and walked into the forest. After a while, he walked out of the woods with a black object swaying on the pitchfork. Upon closer inspection, he realized that it was the cured pork leg that he had brought with him when he left. All that was left was the trotter. His companions watched it for a few days, and finally couldn't stand it anymore. They all laughed. "Erxie, you should stew the poor pig trotters and eat them, or throw them away. Why do you hang them on the pitchfork all day long?" Young Erxie wouldn't listen to them and said, "My wife gave it to you. Eat it slowly. When I pickled it, I used a lot of salt. When I smoked it, I used pine and cypress branches, so it wouldn't go bad." His companions laughed, and absolutely no one had any interest in the poor pig trotters. Young Erxie felt there was some movement beside him. He turned around and saw a little hand gently pulling the corner of his clothes. It was the little girl who had almost been killed by the grassland cavalries. Looking at the dirty little face, he thought of his daughter and comforted her. "Don't be afraid. We will drive those bad people away tomorrow." The little girl wasn't here to talk to him, and there was no fear in her eyes. Instead, there was a luster in them, and a stream of saliva flowed down from the corner of her mouth. Young Erxie followed her gaze and found that she had been staring at the pork trotters hanging on the pitchfork. The little girl's eyes kept moving with her, looking face and said. After thinking for a moment, he removed the pig trotter and stuffed it into the little girl's arms. The little girl laughed happily, wiped the saliva from her mouth, and bowed to him to express her gratitude. Then she ran to her grandmother, shouting something as she ran. One of his companions came to young Erxie and said, her whole family was killed. Only her grandmother and her granddaughter survived by hiding in the cellar. Young Erxie looked at the little girl's back and said nothing. They left half of their rations for the refugees in the village, and then drew a simple map, telling them that there was a temporary government office of the imperial court in charge of gathering the refugees and retreating 17 miles away in the southwest. After doing these things, they pulled the 20 or so uninjured horses and left the village. The next morning, these retired Tang soldiers met with the main force. Young Erxie, you're good. You got a knife so quickly. A cavalryman looked at him and said. Young Erxie said proudly, it's nothing. It took me a lot of effort to kill the 3 barbarians. Speaking of which, if it weren't for me not wanting to fight for credit, the 2 who were seriously injured by me would have been on my account. The cavalryman laughed and said, good, good. I won't forget to report to the commander and record your credit. Don't forget that I was in the border army in the 2nd year of the Tianqi era. What's with your attitude? Young Erxie laughed and scolded him. He carried the pitchfork and followed his companions into the forest. The cavalryman held his horse's belly and came to a hillside along another road. He came to the side of the commander's horse and reported in a low voice the military information he had just received. Lu Si, the commander of the valiant cavalry battalion, nodded solemnly and raised his hand to signal the cavalryman to leave. Then he looked at the middle-aged man beside him and said, Long Qing sped up and missed us. The middle-aged man was dressed in cyan and looked calm. He was particularly eye-catching among the hundreds of cavalrymen of the valiant cavalry battalion. It was Cao Xiaoshu. Cao Xiaoshu said, Long Qing was too anxious and the defense of the prefecture and county was too weak. Lu Si said, the prefecture and county army could fight on foot, but they couldn't do anything against the grassland cavalry. They fought hard and tried their best. Cao Xiaoshu said, I don't mean to blame them. Among the prefecture and county army, only the Gushan commandery has real combat power. Hua Shanhua did a good job as the commander of the 3 prefectures, but most of his soldiers were transferred to the northern military camp to resist the Golden Tribe royal court from the south. So we can't count on him. Lu Si was a little depressed. He followed Cao Xiaoshu and 800 cavalrymen of the valiant cavalry battalion out of Chang unto the eastern border. It was difficult and dangerous along the way. They also fought with the grassland cavalry several times, but they couldn't fundamentally change the situation. Because they were too few in number, they didn't even dare to meet Long Qing's main cavalry. Cao Xiaoshu said, Don't think too much. Although they can only harass and chase, at least they can keep the barbarians from being too presumptuous. The people of the eastern border will also suffer a little less. After saying this, he looked at the volunteer soldiers who were gradually disappearing into the forest and said with admiration, if it weren't for them, the situation would be really unmanageable. There were many people like young Erxie. Many farmers left their fields and their homes. They took their travel expenses, luggage, and the sabers or bows and arrows that they brought back from the army to the distant eastern border. At that time, the imperial court's conscription order had not yet arrived in their hometowns, but they left in advance. Logically speaking, this was not a wise thing to do, because they had no organization and didn't even know where the battlefield was. But this war was different. It was a war that concerned the survival of the Tang Empire. So the news of the invasion of foreign enemies was a military order, a conscription order. If they met a person on the road or in the forest and saw the old saber or bow on his waist, they could confirm that he was a companion, so they could be organized into a powerful force. As for where the battlefield was? Wherever the enemy was, that was where the battlefield was. This was young Xerxes' idea, and it was also the idea of his companions. According to the post-war statistics, there were more than 20,000 retired Tang soldiers in the central prefectures of the Tang Empire. Before the conscription order arrived, they volunteered to fight against the invaders at the eastern border. This group of earliest and most lovely counterattackers of the Tang Empire, in the end, less than half of them could return home. My body is exhausted, but my mind is still clear. I am very satisfied with these chapters. I hope you all like them. There will be more tonight. Since I said I would fight with my life, I will naturally fight with my life. Please continue to vote for me. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.